Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority meeting for June 17th, 2013. First of all, I would request that you put your cell phone on silence or vibrate. And also, if you intend to speak this evening on any item on or off of our agenda, verbal communications or an agenda item, please fill out one of these cards and hand them to the clerk over here on my left. And speaking of clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Joe Przynski.
Here.
Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Stephen Leonardis.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. The first thing we do in any of our meetings after we go through those preliminaries is do the salute to the flag. And so today I'm going to, or this evening, I'm going to ask Catherine Callow to join me up here so I can tell you a little bit about her. Catherine is a fourth grader, or will be a fourth grader in the fall, at Alta Vista Elementary School. Is that right? Okay. She was elected to the student council and will be a fourth grade treasurer. Her favorite subject is math. She just finished in Brownies and will be a junior Girl Scout in the fall. She loves participating in service projects with her troop. Recently, they collected donations for a family shelter, and they visited the Humane Society to learn about helping animals. She enjoys reading and crafts. She is teaching herself to sew and has already made an apron and a pillowcase. She also plays the piano and completed the Certificate of Merit Level 1 recently. She is the captain of her soccer team, the Los Gatos United Cheetahs Black Team. Her favorite position is left defender. She also enjoys swimming and playing on the equipment at school. Of the children in her family, Catherine is the only child who likes to sleep in, which makes her parents very happy. So let's give this astounding young woman a round of applause. If you'll please stand and join us in the salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the country which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Another round of applause. Mom and Dad are so proud, and rightfully so. Town Attorney, closed session report.
Thank you. The council met in closed session tonight on the items duly noticed and as set forth on the agenda. With respect to the item on conference with legal counsel regarding initiation of litigation, council considered two potential cases based on existing facts and circumstances that the legislative body of the town has either decided or is deciding whether to initiate litigation on one of those items that they have authorized litigation. That concludes closed session. Thank you.
Thank you. Council and town manager reports, beginning with council matters. Do we have any council member that has a report out? Seeing none, manager matters.
Mayor and council,
Mr. Manager, hold on just a second. Did I skip over the vice mayor? Sorry about that. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I attended two meetings since our last council meeting. One was for the West Valley Sanitation District, and one was for the West Valley Collection and Recycling, the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. I have nothing substantial to report.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Manager.
Yes. Mayor and members of the council, only a few items. First, the town is continuing to solicit applications for the Transportation and Parking Commission for the council to interview and appoint in August. More information on the commission and the application and deadline for applying is on the town website. Second, this Thursday is the annual Special Olympics Torch Run that will be coming through the town of Los Gatos and arriving here at the Civic Center at 10 a.m. with support from our public outreach coordinator in the police department. And last, I do like to highlight for council desk items that have been provided for tonight's meeting. You should have a desk item for item number 1 related to the minutes. Item number 3 relating to the lease agreement with the Museum Association. Item number 5 related to the Albright development, and item number 12 related to firearms regulations. Those are the 4 desk items provided today to council. That concludes staff report, and we do not have a did you know tonight.
Thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda are the consent items. They will be acted upon in a single motion unless a council member or member of the audience pulls an item from the consent calendar. We have, looks like 9 items on our consent calendar. I will begin with the council. Does any member of the council wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to pull item number 2. You want me to explain why now or wait?
The normal course would be for you to explain now, please.
Being a new council member, the contract that's mentioned in item number 2 is quite new to me. I don't recall, although it may have been discussed at the budget meetings, I don't recall it. It's a large budget item. I have some questions regarding some of the paragraphs that are contained in the proposed contract, which may be complicated. I know we have a very long and busy agenda tonight, so I would be interested in getting answers to those questions at tonight or at some other appropriate time.
All right. For the record, agenda item 2 is the annual renewal of agreement for services with the Los Gatos Chamber of Commerce to manage the town's information center and coordinate the Leadership Los Gatos program. It does include an approval of a contract. It has been pulled from the consent calendar, and as mayor, I am going to place this not at the end of this agenda, but on our first agenda in August, so that we can consider this. And does anybody else want to pull an item from the consent calendar? Seeing none, does anybody from the audience wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? And if you do, would you please come up to the mic and tell us which item it is?
So, Madam Mayor, while we're waiting for the audience, just to confirm, item 2, the recommendation as the mayor is that be moved to the first meeting in August. And per the council code of conduct, any questions we can address prior to the meeting, we would love to be able to.
And we will remind council members of that. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Lee Quintana, I'd like to pull item number 5 for clarification. I'm not pulling it for reconsideration.
All right, so Lee Quintana has pulled item number 5. At this point, we will hear it in its normal order. Ms. Jensen, did you have anything else?
I just had a question regarding the date of the first meeting in August.
Monday, August 5th, I believe it is.
Thank you.
Let's look at the calendar, actually.
Is it
Yes.
August 5th? All right.
Yes.
Does anybody want to pull any other item from our consent calendar? Seeing no one, we have now had items number 2 and 5 pulled from the consent calendar. May I have a motion?
Mayor?
I'm sorry, Mr. Leonardis.
Move to approve the consent calendar excluding items 2 and 5.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, since I said we were going to hear it in order, the next item on our agenda is agenda item 5. Plan Development PD 12001, and Environmental Impact Report EIR 12003. The project location, 90 to 160 Albright Way and 14600 Winchester Boulevard. Property owner, LG Business Park, LLC. Applicant, John Schenk. This item was pulled by Ms. Quintana. Mr. Larson, unless you indicate otherwise, I'm going to have Ms. Quintana speak to this issue first.
That is the normal process. Did want to remind at this opportunity there was a desk item provided for this agenda item.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Quintana?
I'm just going to speak on one issue. There'll be other people, I believe, who will speak on other issues. I'll try. First, I need to put something on the calendar. The height reduction approved by the council for the garage and for buildings 1 and 4 will reduce the project's visual impacts from Charter Oaks, Highway 85, and along a portion of Winchester. The resulting reduction in square footage of buildings 1 and 4 will decrease the parking needs from somewhere between 200 and 300 spaces. The reduced parking requirements create an opportunity to increase the landscape buffer between Charter Oaks and the garage by removing the parking spaces to the south of the garage, to increase the landscape buffer between the creek area and parking by removing some of the parking adjacent to the creek. This would further reduce noise impacts and reduce visual impacts to Charter Oaks. The noise would be reduced because there would be no slamming of doors, starting of engines, or conversations immediately to the rear of the houses. The elimination of parking spaces would also create an opportunity to provide additional private open space for the development itself by removing possibly some parking spaces to the east of buildings 1 and 2, and it would allow for the retention of additional trees. Since these things were not stated, or the parking reduction was not stated explicitly in the council's motion, I'd like to ask how that can occur, and what are the implementation measures that would allow for change of the landscaping plans and the parking spaces, and can the conditions either be made explicit, or can the council give direction through the staff to the consulting architect? And I'd just like to point out the areas that I'm talking about, if I can get this off. The areas by the south side of building 4, the south side of the garage, the northwest side of the creek trail, and an additional area near the buildings 2 and 1, which would increase the open space for the buildings themselves.
Thank you. And why don't you stay up there for a bit, because you've provided the opportunity. We are on agenda item 5 by virtue of it being pulled from the consent calendar. I will represent that I have several speakers who wish to talk to this item. And so I will ask staff if you could explain to all of us what the parameters of our hearing is this evening.
Yes, Mayor and Council, this is the second reading of the Plan Development Ordinance that the Council approved at your meeting on June 3rd with direction to staff to implement changes to that ordinance. We have provided you with the copy of the ordinance with the changes directed by Council, and then in today's desk item, we provided other changes that we thought further implemented and clarified the Council's direction of June 3rd. And those were provided in the desk item starting on page 1 under council comments. So we do have some clarifications to your prior action. If the council wishes to make substantive changes to the project as previously approved by council, we have a policy for reconsideration that could be separately discussed by the council if that's what you chose to do. Regarding the issues raised by Ms. Quintana, that is certainly something staff would review with the consulting architect as the revisions to the A&S come back per your prior direction on June 3rd, as reflected in the PD ordinance that's before you tonight.
Thank you. So if I understand what you're saying is if it is not a substantive or significant change as the ones on the desk item, we can move forward on it this evening. But if it's considered, and I'll look to staff to make that call, a substantive, then we would have to do that by virtue of a motion for reconsideration.
Correct.
Before we go on, do we have questions of staff? Ms. Jensen.
2 questions, if I might. The first question being, for the process this evening, since we have several speakers, do we listening to the speakers prior to making a determination that a motion to reconsider is appropriate, or does that need to happen before?
Our normal process would be you hear the public comment cards before returning the item to council for discussion and action.
And that was also how I intended to proceed.
And my second question, with respect to the language changes that are in the desk item we received earlier, which I understood you to indicate are ministerial, does council need to take an action to make sure those proposed ministerial changes are made?
Since this is the second reading of the ordinance and the final reading of the ordinance, we would recommend that if whoever makes the motion for this item include those changes in the motion.
And for the council's benefit, and I'm sure you're looking at it, but the first page of our staff report under recommendation has the direction staff is suggesting. Is that correct, Mr. Larson?
Correct.
All right, Ms. Quintana, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, the next speaker on this matter is Jennifer Grewal, and after Ms. Grewal will be John Shepherdson.
My name is Jennifer Graywall. I live in Charter Oaks and have for the past 13 years. I don't understand what's in the desk item because it did come out after I was able to recheck things this afternoon. So is there a way that we can understand what is in the desk item for our benefit? I'm going to skip over a little bit of what I had because I have been told that it is there. On June 4th, I had sent a note to the town council and Jesse Pooh about the Keep Clear Zone. We had been informed as the board of directors for Charter Oaks that this was not safe at the time that the Charter Oaks board had received the merge lane that is now on Lark Avenue for our use. I would like clarification about that being safe or unsafe for Charter Oaks. I think that traffic has changed so drastically and will continue to change so drastically. I would like this put for consideration of reevaluation by professional traffic organizations who can tell us whether or not a signalized intersection is appropriate. I understand years ago it was deemed inappropriate, but traffic conditions have changed significantly. Additionally, between that if that were to be placed as a signalized intersection, it would be the longest signalized intersection on most of Lark Avenue. So it is not the shortest section that is being asked for a signalized intersection for us to get in and out. That is my request, and I would like to know how we would go about making sure that this is studied first before a decision is made as to what we as Charter Oaks get for our safe entrance and exit from our community.
Thank you. And just for everybody's understanding, at this point we are taking input to the council. And after everybody has spoken to us, the council will have the opportunity to ask questions of staff. But if somebody could provide the speaker with the packet of information, is that possible, Mr. Larson?
Clerk just provided it.
All right, we have John Shepherdson next, followed by Jeff Lowridge.
All right. First, I'm here to just offer to the council whether or not they're going to reconsider the Albright decision. John Shepherdson, Oak Rim Way. I want to thank the council and the mayor for your leadership in standing up for the town. Next. Some things to remember going forward with respect to the developer's Gateway project. It's been unimproved for 4 years. This is a picture of the Gateway project, so we're concerned about money for the schools. It's been vacant for 4 years. The developer also has been involved in litigation in the city of Sunnyvale. They don't say very nice things about him. He's holding them hostage. It's onerous litigation due to lack of funding. They didn't finish the project, and there's been lots of lawsuits filed, so we must be careful going forward with this developer. The developer said at the outset he needed 85 feet tall buildings, had to have it to keep Netflix. What it did is it played into fear into the community. They're going to leave if they don't have 85 feet. The EIR in 2003 said the environmentally superior alternative was 350,000 square feet, 2-story and 3-story buildings, and let's go. So these are the demands. He needed a minimum of 7% return. 550 was 7.1, 350 is 6.3. This is what I want to get at tonight. The staff, with all due respect, accepted the developer's feasibility numbers, and as a result, rejected the 350. This was the environmentally best use of the land. The town's EIR report said that. But the staff said, no, it's not feasible. We shouldn't be in the business of determining what is feasible for the developer. So 485 has been approved. What does that mean? That means 6.85%. That means the developer should be leaving town right now because they didn't get the 7%. But what do we hear? We hear that they're proceeding with the project. That means that they weren't being straight with us. Next. They're also willing to accept 3-story buildings and 50-foot tall buildings. We haven't heard that they're leaving because of that. And the 550, keep going. So the staff's reliance on those representations caused the loss of the best use of the land for the town. Proceed. And it allowed the developer to put tremendous pressure on the council to up the square footage. I want to talk about easements. We've given the developer 2.5 acres of easements. The staff says they're not worth anything, but you know what? They're worth a lot to the developer. Proceed. It's an unfair burden on the staff to be dealing with feasibility. We should remember that the feasibility numbers can be inaccurate, and they should get out of the business of analyzing feasibility.
Thank you. Questions from Mr. Shepherdson? No. Ms. Rose, I want to thank you for working with that. I also want you and the council to know that the policy committee will be coming forward with a process to deal with audiovisual.
Thank you.
Mr. Jeff Lowridge, followed by Jack Van Ada.
It's Jeff Lockridge. I know it doesn't look like that, but that's what it is.
It actually doesn't. But go ahead.
Okay. These questions concern clarifying the PD ordinance as well as the equivalent in the ANS document. The following numbers are from the PD ordinance. So 103, which is the traffic mitigation fee, doesn't this need to be updated to reflect new maximum square footage? I don't think it's in there. Number 104, can the actual benefit offered be stated here? Because it's not. Number 107, the traffic signal. How does this relate to number 110, which are traffic improvements? They seem to gloss over two different things, and they talk about them separately, but not as though they're the same items. On signal timing and synchronization, why doesn't this include the freeway intersections and Knowles and Winchester? If you're going to synchronize that section of Winchester, it makes sense to have all those lights there. And clarify what significant building occupancy means. Is that a percentage of square feet or a specific time? For 110 and 113, how do these relate to each other? Is there a conflict with 110? And what does substantially completed mean? Is it quantifiable? And is there a time for restoration on 114? The last things are, will the project be responsible for additional traffic mitigation fees if it's not completed within the 5-year time frame used to analyze the project for the EIR? Why has it taken the town this long to clearly answer questions from various members of the public regarding who is responsible for required traffic mitigation? And why isn't that information included in the PD ordinance and the conditions of approval for the ANS? This should be clear in the EIR. If this information was included, it would avoid confusion in the future. And last, why hasn't the town raised its traffic mitigation impact fee since 1991 to keep pace with increasing costs over time? And why weren't the traffic impact fees included in the recently approved town fee schedule? I've looked into other towns and cities, and ours is so old that we're charging much less than what the other towns and cities are charging for construction fees and for traffic mitigation fees. And it seems silly to leave that much money on the table because you're talking about millions of dollars, not just, hundreds of thousands. So it would be something I think would be nice to look into. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack Van Nader, who will be followed by Ann Robinson.
Good evening, Jack Van Nader, Euclid Avenue in Los Gatos. In the agenda today, it refers to the applicant's, quote, offer, end quote, to provide $1 per constructed square foot of new office R&D buildings. That would be, of course, $485,000, and since it is a offer to give this amount, I presume this is over and above any required amounts as provided by law. To help me understand, I've read the amendment of Article 9 of Chapter 15 of the Town Code relating to the mitigation of road impacts caused by construction projects. In that ordinance, written and adopted May 3rd of 2010, the town found the following. In the study, most towns chose to charge between $1.41 and $2.09 per square foot for non-residential construction to offset the additional costs of heavy equipment used to build out projects. However, Los Gatos resolved to charge only $1 per square foot for non-residential construction, 57% of the average of what other towns in the study charged. My question would be, why did the town decide to charge, on average, only 57% of what other towns charged? As I read Article 9, I did not see why the garage space was included in the fee of $1 per square foot. There appears to be nothing in Article 9 that excludes the garages and suggests that the fees need to be added to the total. It would seem that in addition to the $485,000 offered by Mr. Schenk, that there would be an additional $485,000 due per Article 9 and another $1 per square foot for the garage. I don't know construction heights for garages, but believe that the garage could vary between 152,000 and 304,000 square feet, which would mean, of course, additional fees of $152,000 to $304,000 due to the town. I don't see those numbers anywhere in tonight's numbers, and given that other towns are roughly 175% above our $1 per square foot, I doubt that Mr. Schenk could argue the fairness of those two numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Ann Robinson, followed by Andy Wu.
Ann Robinson, 201 Charter Oak Circle. I'd first like to thank the staff for including in the desk items my emails, answers to my emails, and the revisions that I submitted this morning. I have a couple of questions on the revisions that were submitted in the May 20th meeting by John Shank. Building number 4 is to be modified so that there was no fourth floor balcony facing Charter Oaks. Just wondering if there will be a balcony on the 3rd floor now of the 4th building facing Charter Oaks. There was increased planting fingers and new tree selections to provide a greater canopy and screening. I wanted to maybe know what the new tree selections were, since these will be on the border with Charter Oaks. We will be looking at them every day. Does Charter Oaks residents can request to have the blue sequoia redwoods? They are the best screening for buildings and grow twice as fast as most other trees. Low planting and screen panels added to shield views from Charter Oaks on the between the garage and Willow Hill Court. What do these screening panels look like? Do the residents of Charter Oaks have a choice on the screening panels? The trash enclosures have been relocated along Winchester to reduce noise. Can the developer move the southernmost trash enclosure farther north so that the garbage trucks so that they only have to enter once at the signalized intersection and exit once at the signalized intersection? Or they can also exit at the northernmost entrance and exit. Right now, the way the trash enclosures are, they have to come in twice. They'll have to come in and then exit, and then come in and then exit. Does the mechanical equipment add to the 50 feet or the 65 feet height limitation, because the mechanical equipment will be on top of the roofs of the buildings now? The last question. The vehicle circulation around Charter Oaks. I know Lee asked about removing the parking between the garage and Charter Oaks Drive, or I'm sorry, garage and Willow Hill Court. And can that vehicle circulation be changed to where there's not vehicles coming behind Willow Hill Court, between the garage and Willow Hill Court, to either west of the garage or maybe through the garage? I don't know about emergency issues in that regard, but if there was something that could be done, if that parking is taken out, that would help, I think, the residents, especially on Willow Hill Court. Thank you.
Thank you. My last speaker card on this item is Andy Wu. Anyone else wishing to speak, you should have submitted a card. Mr. Wu.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I know you have gunfighters on both sides of the audience this evening. All I brought was a knife, so I'm going to do my thing and get out. Unusual for me. I'm given to understand that the 485,000 square foot maximum that the council previously approved for the Albright project, which is not a goal, but rather a limitation, was predicated upon the fact that since information was not readily available at the time of the council meeting on this matter to either staff or council, in any of the projected information or the visual projections provided by the developer, that a certain amount of uncertainty exists as to the final square footage of the 4th floor of now 2 of the buildings, which had been intended for 4 of the buildings. Therefore, I'd like to request that this council clarify in its ordinance and the ANS guidelines that there will be no increase in the footprints of any of the 4 intended buildings as construction proceeds. And I would anticipate that it's going to proceed towards the 485,000 square foot maximum. If this council chooses not to clarify those matters in either the ordinance or the ANS guidelines, I'd like to know why.
Thank you. I have no further cards. I will then close the public testimony portion of this hearing. I'm going to turn to the council, and just to summarize, at this point, we'll begin by questions of staff, and after that, we have choices to make the motions on the first page of our staff report, some variation thereof, or a motion for reconsideration. That being said, anybody want to ask questions of staff? Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Jensen had her hand up first, but I will go, I guess. I have been asking about the easements for quite a while, about 2.5 years on this project, and really getting not much satisfaction in the sense that the answer has always been the same. And that answer was, those are streets, and we're kind of relieving ourselves of the maintenance obligation if we just give them up. And the problem with that I have with that is that it's a substantial amount of area. And I realized that when we originally were given those easements when the first project was taken out, that technically we received the property for free, or the right to cross the property for free, the easements for free. However, it's been 30, 35 years since we received that property, and I believe there is some value to that property. It equates to 2.7 acres, which is the equivalent of 3 building footprints or quite a bit of open space, or something that can complete this project. And in the existing configuration with the street layout, if we weren't going to give up those streets, this project couldn't go forward as planned. Now, I don't know how this council would vote, and I don't want to anticipate how they would vote should we be given the opportunity to do so when presented with some kind of evaluation. The fact that there is no valuation, for me, it's been difficult to make any kind of a determination. So on this whole project, I just vote no, because I feel like potentially the taxpayers the streets really belong to the taxpayers, or the citizens of Los Gatos, in effect. And by giving those to the developer for zero, whether that's the valuation or not, I feel like you're giving away the taxpayers' money, and I have a real problem with that. So Mr. Shepherdson alluded to it in his comments. I appreciate that. I have been thinking about this for a very long time, and I'm just not comfortable giving those streets away for free, or essentially releasing our easements for no compensation. So that's it.
We didn't pose that as a question, but Mr. Larson, do you have a response?
We're available to answer any questions. We've tried to provide the information from the very first Planning Commission staff report and the original ordinance that was presented to the Planning Commission, that the streets would be vacated. The town does not own the streets. We own an easement solely for public access. As detailed in the staff reports, there would no longer be public access on those properties. They would be privately maintained streets and access and driveways, which is the norm for planned developments at this point in time. It has been part of the project since its inception before the Planning Commission.
Ms. Jensen first.
I had a series of questions that were based on what were brought up by the speakers. Can I do that?
Well, let me go back.
Also, I can follow up on the easement first.
Okay, why don't you do the easement first, and then I'll go back to Mr. Leonardis.
Okay. 2 questions regarding the easement. Has the staff figured out, I know that, and I can't remember, I'm sorry, who it was who provided the answer at the last meeting regarding the easements or the value of the easements, but we were given the answer that with the original development, the town was granted access over the property for public access, and that the town was now going to give that up, which would result in a savings to the town because it would not perform maintenance. Has the town ever put a dollar value on that savings?
Mr. Rahani was the one who responded to that question previously on May 20th. He is again available this evening. There are actually 2 factors that were identified in the desk item provided to council. One is future maintenance obligations for the Albright Loop, as well as inherent liability that comes with ownership of any public streets. Those would be the 2 future cost avoidances. I don't believe we've been able to calculate any discrete number as to that value yet at this time. That is correct.
Ms. Jensen?
I think this is for Ms. Prop. What effect, if any, does the State Highway Code have on any obligations the town might have to give up the easement when it converts from public to private?
As set forth in the desk item, based on some of the council questions, Generally, what happens when a developer would have happened, as Vice Mayor Leonardis indicated when the initial development happened at Albright Way, is that as a requirement of that project, that developer would have had to dedicate both easements for right-of-way, which are public streets, which then the town had the obligation to maintain, as well as for utilities. In this case, now that the project is proposed to be redeveloped in line with the council's approval of the introduction of the ordinance of the planned development, is what the developer is asking and what the town is proposing is that the existing right-of-way for easements for the public access for the streets be vacated. The developer then has to actually allot essentially the same amount of land for what then becomes privately maintained streets, allowing the town and other public agencies access for emergency basis. The other thing that's obligated under this development plan is the developer, while they vacate, and they'll have to get vacation from utilities, both public and private utilities, they'll have to then rededicate that land for the same utilities, just relocated in different places. So you're really not getting anything back, really not trading. I mean, basically it's trading. You're trading public streets for private streets. You're trading public utility easements that are existing and just relocating them and vacating them as to their current location, and they'll have to be rededicated to those utilities for water, sewer, electricity, and other public utilities. So it doesn't really equate to getting anything or other than just relocating. You asked about the Streets and Highway Code. Anytime that a public agency vacates or abandons an easement because there's no reason for a public use anymore, then that land is transferred free and clear of its easement. So nothing happens. The town just immediately, if we file a vacation or abandonment in conjunction with council's approval of the final map, then the landowner, the underlying landowner who is the property owner at Albright Way, who owns it in fee, they basically own that land, and just there's an easement for the town's benefit, for the utility benefits, owns that underlying land. So there's nothing for the town to own or sell or negotiate.
Ms. Jensen? Okay, you're done. Are you done on the easements? All right. Mr. Leonardis.
Well, I would like to thank the attorney for the explanation. I still want to understand what we've done in the past. Obviously, we have not seen this situation before, at least that I'm aware of, especially with the quantity of streets, it being 2.7 acres of land that we have the right to cross. And the configuration that the developer has proposed, most of the access is through parking lots and things like that. So I can agree that the public access is being reallocated, but it's not in the current form that we're seeing it. But I would like to know what past precedence was, and then I would like to know why we didn't opt to do an appraisal, because did someone on staff make an assumption, or let me know.
We do need the mic for staff, the assistants getting it. We're not aware offhand of any past practice. I'm just confirming that with Mr. Rohani and Ms. Bailey, past precedent of vacating this volume of streets.
No, not in the recent memory that we've been involved with. There has not been any project that would necessitate vacation of such easements.
All right, right now I'm going to have people focus in on easement questions. Does anybody else have easement questions? Mr. Vice Mayor, do you have anything further?
I'm just going to mention that I think Personally, I believe it needs further evaluation and a decision by council. That's the way I feel about it. I don't feel like this kind of decision with this amount should be decided without council discretion.
I have a question of staff. Following up on what you said, somebody mentioned that the public access easement is being vacated. Somebody else mentioned that there would be savings attributable to that because the town would no longer have to maintain those streets. Have we determined whether that would result in a net savings to the town, or do we have a determination one way or the other?
Mr. Rouhani, do you want to?
Sure. Mayor Spector, we have not made a determination on the exact amount of the savings as far as the maintenance of the roads in the Albright project site. We do this as a part of our annual street resurfacing and repair. Condition of the streets in that complex is average. It would need resurfacing. There's a lot of trees out there that have caused some damage to the curbs and sidewalks. Those are expenses that we have not been able to calculate for the purpose of this project. But if project moves forward, all of that would be demolished and replaced with a new private roads that will be maintained by the developer.
All right, are there any? Ms. Jensen.
Let me try it this way, Mr. Rouhani. If you were to replace curbs and repave under the normal street maintenance for, say, 2 miles of streets in the town of Los Gatos, what, based on your experience, would be the cost of doing that?
If I have 1 minute, I can just do a back of napkin calculation for you.
While he's doing that, Ms. Jensen, do you have questions that don't require calculations?
I can't guarantee it, but I did have questions based upon the speakers, and I don't know if you want to have me categorize them. So I'll try categorizing. Ms. Quintana talked about the reduced square footage resulting in less parking, but it sounded to me as though her primary concern was, can we now increase landscaping or change the plan to provide more of a buffer? Ms. Robinson, I think, was asking about landscaping, balconies, things that I consider to be site and architecture and site type items. So my question is, I know that in our desk item, we have an indication that future changes to plans will go back to the Planning Commission. I know that if there's not a, quote, future change to plan, unquote, it would go to staff. But are those things architecture and site, and therefore ministerial, that can be subject to review during that process, or are they a substantive change?
Mayor and Council, the desk item was to try to differentiate changes to the architecture and site that have already been directed by Council, which go to the consulting architect for final review and approval, and any future changes that may be desired at the project 5 years, 10 years, whenever down the road that haven't been subject to council action tonight. Those would have to go back through the Planning Commission council process. For both Ms. Quintana's and Ms. Robinson's comments, I did consult with the project planner, and we believe that for Ms. Quintana's, the changes she identified as possibilities result directly from the council direction on June 3rd to eliminate a floor of Building 1 and Building 4, and that would go back as part of the consulting architect review to see if parking changes are appropriate based on that. So we believe that is encompassed in your prior motion. As for most all of Ms. Robinson's comments, those were part of the revised plans and direction that the applicant provided prior to your action on June 3rd that were incorporated in your motion of approval. So those will be coming back as well. And the one overlap is using the example of the balcony on Building 4, which the applicant had already stated prior to May 20th would be removed. since you've gotten rid of Building 4, it's a fair, or not Building 4, excuse me, fourth floor of Building 4, it's a fair question to ask now, is that subsequently removed from Building 3? The long-winded answer that I'll make short is all of the issues that I believe were raised by Ms. Quintana and Ms. Robinson will be part of the consulting architect's review as the applicant comes forward, given the direction you've already provided.
Ms. Jensen?
Okay. Mr. Lockridge was concerned about basically specificity in definitions, significant building occupancy substantially completed. Are those things that can be more particularized in the ordinance like the other language we have in our desk item and therefore be ministerial, or is there an accepted town definition of those?
Kevin was still calculating.
Would you like me to? Sure. Based on approximately a 2-mile roadway, if we wanted to reconstruct a brand new roadway with curb and gutter on both sides, that costs about $2.2 million to reconstruct 2 miles of roadway in that complex.
Thank you. And what about the definitional?
Mr. Lockridge brought up a number of questions about a number of different conditions that required additional definition. We did provide some clarification in today's desk item on the traffic mitigation fee and other project calculations based on the new revised maximum square footage as presented by council. And both Mr. Lockridge and Mr. Van Natta spoke about the traffic impact fee, which the council did previously consider potential changes to the traffic impact fee 2 years ago and directed staff to explore other potential changes to that. That study is actually underway this next fiscal year, and prior to a recent announced retirement was planned to come back to you in the fall, but will certainly be back to you prior to June.
Ms. Jensen?
Just to make sure I understand your answer, increasing or changing traffic impact fees is in fact under consideration and that the council will hear it hopefully early next year?
Correct.
Okay. There were 2 other things that I needed to address.
Go ahead.
The community benefit paragraph, I know that in our desk item, it's more specific to include what I fondly call the dirt exchange. Is there anything else that could be added to that with respect to, I know there was questions regarding, well, where are we calculating the $ square foot? Is that in addition to what's required but in the traffic impact fees as a community benefit? If not, why not? And how can that be made more clear in our ordinance, if it can be?
It is in addition to what would be required of the project, so that is meeting the definition of community benefit. We can pull any of those other items out of the 2 letters that are referenced in that performance standard and list those if so directed.
And one last one, which is the proposed keep clear zone. I think I understood you, I think it was Mr. Larson said that, or it was in the desk item regarding signage or study of something that was contained in the council motion. Maybe if you could just explain that for me so I'm clear on the keep clear zone.
Especially since not everybody in the public has seen the desk item. The council at your meeting on June 3rd added a specific condition that a keep clear zone markings or other appropriate language and, keep clear or other appropriate equivalent markings and signage be provided at Larkin Charter Oaks. What will happen in the normal order of things is the applicant will propose what they're planning to do in fulfillment of that condition added by council. Parks and Public Works staff will then review what is most appropriate for the safety of the community at that intersection, and it's part of why staff encourage adding the language at your last meeting or equivalent markings or signage so that multiple solutions could be explored to ensure a safe neighborhood.
Ms. Jensen?
2 more, I promise. just so I understand, what you've just explained to us means that if staff were to determine that the keep clear zone is not appropriate, it would not have to be implemented. Is that correct?
Correct, and we would probably return to council for direction and discussion.
Okay. And my final question is, your responses to the various issues that have been raised and how the speakers presented them, did you hear anything that was something other than what I'm going to say, to use your language, ministerial, or adding specificity to the ordinance versus a substantive change?
The one request is Ms. Robinson was reading off a list of points. It would be helpful for staff to have those to provide to the consulting architect.
Okay, is that a
You have them
substantive?
already.
You can't answer that until you get those from Ms.
Well, or no substantive changes to the project as discussed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So, just for clarification, Mr. Rohani referred to 2 miles of streets at 2.2 million for maintenance, but it's actually just 2.7 acres. I'm not sure how that equates, but in any event, that will no longer be a cost for us regardless, because some project will be being put there inevitably, some form of project. And Mr. Shepherdson submitted a letter today with a very compelling argument of why there should have been an appraisal on those 2.7 acres of easements. And for me, the information, and we're adopting a resolution with incomplete information, in my opinion. It should the resolution be adopted. So I'll be voting no.
And I will go back to the staff. I will say that the easement issue raised by the emails that we've received over the past couple of weeks has raised something that I've been looking at. The savings make sense to me. The fact that they've now been quantified, that's good. But what I still don't have my arms around is whether or not there is a public access easement vacated value that we should be examining. And that's, should we be examining it under staff's opinion? Do we have a value for it? How does that compare with the 2.2 million? These are issues for me.
Under state law, it's not ours to value. The land is owned by the property owner, and the town has an easement for public access only so long as it needs that public access. In this case, a project has been approved that now does not mandate public access, and that is why the developer has asked the town, or will be asking when the map comes forward, to abandon and vacate those easements. The land remains owned by the underlying landowner, and it just remains their property without the easement overlay.
And so are you saying that a public access easement has no value?
If the town's determined that it no longer needs that access and there's no public purpose for it, then the town doesn't have any right to that easement if it no longer needs that for a public reason, for a public purpose.
All right, thank you. Further questions? Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Let's suppose that 2.7 acres of streets were currently as public access used by trail users or various people for parking, even though there's an office complex there that's largely vacated, has been vacated. Doesn't that represent some kind of value just as parking for our residents? Again, I'm not trying to belabor this subject, but we're not talking about a small fragment of a sidewalk or a driveway approach or something that we're vacating. We're talking about something that we've really never, as far as I know, vacated before, which is 2.7 acres, and it's quite substantial. So I guess without any kind of information to the contrary, being an appraisal or some evaluation of it, I just am troubled by the fact that it's not worth anything. And coming from a real estate background and knowing other negotiations that we're having with other entities and similar discussions, I just find it to be hard to believe that it's worthwhile to vacate it for zero.
Other questions? All right, seeing none, I'm going to turn to the council. I will, before we start, we have, as I said, basically three general directions we can take here. Staff's recommendation on page 1 of our staff report, staff's recommendation with modifications, or a motion for reconsideration. Assuming, that's not true. If we go to number 2, which is the recommendation with modifications, I will be looking to the makers of the motion to verbalize their modifications, and I will be looking to staff to fine-tune those. Do I have a motion? Ms. Jensen.
Okay, Madam Mayor, I'll do my best. I had asked staff, and I know many of you have looked up the policy for motions to reconsider, and it can only be brought by those people. It can only be brought in the meeting right after the last decision was made, and it can only be brought by people who actually voted for the motion. So I would be one of those people. But I was listening carefully tonight, and thank you for your presentations. I was listening carefully to a presentation of something that was a different circumstance, something that was new information, or something that was not in our staff report or considered at our last hearing. And I didn't hear that with the possible exception of the easements. I think everything else that was discussed was actually a subject of discussion at the last meeting. It's not new. Most of you asked for clarifications, or you asked for changes based upon what council approved at the last meeting. So to me, I don't think that there's enough to make a motion to reconsider. I do think, based on the questions or the answers we got from the staff, that it is appropriate to modify the ordinance that we have in front of us. So my motion would be to approve, or I guess adopt the resolution with the following modifications. And Mr. Larson, I'm going to belabor this a little bit. I know that Ms. Graywall, you got a copy of the desk item, so maybe you can follow along. But the first paragraph indicates that there could be development up to 485,000 square feet, and then it goes on to talk about landscaping, the garage, etc. To me, that made it seem as though that those other items were possible but not mandatory. So my motion would be to strike the word could, so that all of those things are, you can build to a maximum of 485,000 square feet, then you must landscape, then you must do this to the garage, then you must do etc., rather than have it be an option. That's number 1. Number 2, there's a paragraph regarding ancillary businesses at the site. There was extensive discussion at our meeting last time and in our staff report that any kind of ancillary uses, a cafe, a dry cleaner, a whatever it was that was being proposed, would be for the use of the office. And right now the ordinance is primarily. The discussion was, no, it would be for the use of the office only. And so secondly, I'd move to strike primarily. With respect to the landscaping and other changes that would be necessitated by the council's last motion, my proposal, as indicated in the desk item, would be that we modify the building such that any future changes to the plans would come back for approval in Architecture and Site, whether that be an entirely new change that would need to go to the Planning Commission or a change to the existing plan that's necessitated by tonight's actions that would go to the staff and the consulting architect. So I would ask that we modify the language to include that, and I would highly encourage the staff to make sure that as anything is being considered for a change, a recirculation, a landscape, a balcony, screening, that those be made very public to the members of the community that are so concerned so that they can weigh in and be heard on those items. Then we go on in our desk item. I'm just going to refer to paragraphs 4, 5, and 6, 4 and 5, which talk about guidelines for standards, use near streams, commercial design guidelines. I'd like to change as indicated in our desk item. With respect to the parking garage, that has specific language that indicates that the height is 35 feet, which is inclusive of any solar panels, such that if undergrounding is appropriate to get to that height, then that needs to be done. An addendum or further study needs to come back for EIR to make sure that that's done, and that was actually discussed at the last meeting. That the community benefit be specified as indicated in Section 7. I would add, in addition to what the staff has put regarding the dirt exchange, that also any financial benefits that the developer is offering be specifically set forth in that paragraph. So if those fees for $1 square foot are in addition to traffic impact fees, that those should be specifically set out. I think it should also be made clear that with respect to the Keep Clear zone, that staff will consider and evaluate appropriate signage. If it's not Keep Clear zone, that whatever would be appropriate would be implemented there. I don't know what the language would properly be for that. And I think that's it.
Before I look for a second, Mr. Larson?
We also, there was item 8, which was the to adopt the direct motion of the language of the motion, that there will be no freeway visible signage, rather than the language that was provided.
Yes, I would like to include that in my motion as well. Thank you.
Okay. And then also on page 3 of the desk item, staff did update the 4 conditions regarding traffic impact mitigation fee and other improvements to incorporate the new square footage that the council directed.
Yes, and Mr. Larson, you're referring to paragraphs 103, 105. 103 is traffic impact mitigation fee. 105 is Lark University traffic signal, traffic impact mitigation fees, and Lark University traffic signal. And the proposal is to modify the dollar amounts to reflect the new square footage. And so my motion would include doing that as well.
All right, we now have a motion, and we'd better have a second after all of that work. Okay, so before we get into discussion, do we have a second? All right, Mr. Leonardis?
I'll second the motion, but I would like to know if the maker of the motion would add language to the extent that there's a cost-benefit analysis which is approved by council prior to vacation of the streets.
May I ask a question of Mr. Larson before I decide?
Yes.
My question is, if we were to add that kind of contingent language with respect to the easement, we've had testimony tonight regarding a potential cost benefit and also the impact of the state highway code. If council is provided with information such that Mr. Leonardis is asking for, would that inclusion of that type of language in the paragraphs regarding public and private easement be a substantive change or a ministerial change?
I would also look to the attorney to respond. My advice would be to include direction to staff to provide a more thorough analysis of the cost savings to the town when the final map comes to council for vacation of the public easements. And not to include it in the PD, but to direct staff to provide that at the time of final map.
All right, so the question right now, Ms. Jensen, is are you changing the motion that was on the table?
Yes, if I can do it as Mr. Larson indicated, to provide directions to staff to come back to council with that specific information with respect to the easements.
All right, and with that being said, Mr. Leonardis, are you seconding the motion?
Yes.
Now, we have a motion. Do we have discussion? Mr. Przinski.
I have a question for the motion maker. I think your third point was changing the landscape and various other accommodations. This was the third point you made. I thought I heard you say it would have to come back for A&S. It would have to come back through a public hearing process. Is that correct?
No, I was intending to adopt the language that's in our desk item, which indicates any future A&S application would go back through a public hearing process, which I think is contained what we have in paragraph 3 of our desk item. I understood Mr. Larson's explanation to be that if 5 years from now the project came back for something new, that it would go back through a public hearing process, but for those items that were discussed tonight, that those would go to the consulting architect with notice to those people that were interested to participate in that A&S approval.
All right, I see what you're saying now. Before it sounded to me like almost anything was going to come back through A&S and public hearing. So what you're saying is just basically the language in number 3. Okay.
Yes. Okay, further discussion. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. Question either for the motion maker or staff. As best as I could to try to take notes, it sounded like everything was in the desk item with the exception of taking out the word primarily related to ancillary business. Is that correct?
No, taking out primarily is in the desk item. It's number 2.
So everything you mentioned was just basically a recitation of the desk item?
Pretty much, except I think I changed it a little with the keep clear.
Okay.
All right, further discussion. I see no discussion, and I'm going to be supporting the motion. My biggest concern as I came here this evening was the issue of the easements. However, although it was a back of the napkin kind of analysis, the savings, and also the fact that this was a public access easement and the access is not going to be there any longer. That satisfied my concern on that issue. But before we vote, Mr. Larson, if you could just summarize for us the motion, and if you want to simply reference the desk item, you may.
The motion is the 2 actions that were presented in the original staff report with the changes in today's desk item numbered 1 through 8 on pages 1 and 2, as well as numbers 103 and 105 on page 3, plus the additional direction to staff to report back by the final map on an updated calculation of cost savings to the town for vacation of the public right-of-way easement, to direct that the changes suggested by during the course of public comment that are related to the revised Arkan site be considered by the consulting architect as directed at your prior meeting. And third, that the keep clear be implemented as appropriate as soon as possible following the traffic safety study of whatever is ultimately proposed by the applicant.
Thank you. And on page 3 of the desk item, I may have not heard you. You did not mention 93 and 95. Did you mean to leave those out?
Those should go into, excuse me, those should go in as well.
Okay, thank you.
And I did leave out one of the directions from Ms. Jensen, which was to, she expanded community benefit, that we should explicitly,
Add the specificity of what the applicant offered.
yes. Yeah. And I did want to clarify, Ms. Jensen's motion as requested in the original staff report was both for adopting the revised resolution and for adopting the ordinance.
I'm sorry, and did I need to
They can be
separately
done
do the AR?
together, but you mentioned resolution. I think the record needs to hear both resolution and ordinance.
I'm intending to do both in the motion.
And I understood that, but it should be express, all right? Same, okay with the seconder of the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Spector. A point of clarification for the cost-benefit analysis prior to adopting the final map. Can we require a formal appraisal, a formal valuation, rather than staff analysis solely?
Don't know. We'll have to explore that. Maker of the motion.
All right, so this would need a modification to the motion. We'll start with Ms. Jensen.
First, a question to staff. Could a request for an appraisal be included in the staff evaluation if that's doable? That staff should explore whether an appraisal can be acquired, and if it can be acquired, that it would be part of staff analysis.
We could certainly explore it, and if possible, include it, if that's part of the direction.
Then that's what I would modify the motion to be.
And Mr. Leonardis, are you going to second with that modification?
I will second that.
All right, further discussion. Mr. Brzezinski.
Yes, I'm somewhat confused on this evaluation that we're engaged in here. That comes back to us before the final MAP Act. I'm comfortable with the attorney's interpretation of what an easement means and its own evaluation. My curiosity is, which indicated to me that we really have no value to this. I know this has been reiterated multiple times tonight now, but is it possible that theoretically we have a second opinion on what the attorney told us, and that opinion upholds what she said? Because I think that's really the question being asked. I think it was made clear in the staff report as far as I was concerned. Would that come back to us as the information has been received and it has no necessity of moving forward beyond the fact that we've gotten that information delivered to us?
Is that a question of staff? Mr. Larson?
I took it as a request for information, not as an action. It's an action item to staff to provide information to council.
Ms. Jensen? Yes. Mr. Leonardis?
Sure.
Okay, Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. So we get this information, what do we do with it at that point? What's the point of having that information at that point?
It's an opportunity to learn as the town looks at potential projects that may require vacation of public rights-of-way easements in the future.
So there would be no action. We would have no leverage at that point. Should there come, which I agree with the attorney that we don't own the land, there's no value there, but should there be some value assessed to it more than what the savings would be, what would be our legal leverage at that point to do with that information?
Very little, I believe, under the final map parameters. But
That's something that staff can look into as it returns with the report, but generally on a final map, if the final map conforms to the tentative map, then Councilmember McNutt is correct that there's very little discretion the council will have at that point to do anything with the valuation.
Thank you. Ms. Jensen, you going to stay with your motion?
Yes.
All right. Further discussion. Mr. Vice Mayor.
So point of clarification would be, prior to the council voting for the final map, we'll have this information. And if council looks at this information and has concerns, they can say, well, maybe we will not adopt the final map. Is that errant in my analysis?
If the certainly let Mr. Rouhani weigh in, but generally, the tentative map goes through the process, and if the final map conforms to the tentative map, and then there's very little discretion under state law to make any discretionary actions and make additional conditions or requirements on the final map.
And that's why I was trying to clarify it's an action for us to provide information to the council, not a change in the conditions of approval of the project.
And that seems to have been understood and a part of the maker's motion. Mr. Leonardis?
I have nothing further. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second, we've had discussion. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, now we are on to verbal communications. If you wish to speak to us under verbal communications, please submit a card. And this is for items not on our agenda. I have one card, John Shepherdson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Something I think it's far less contentious. I just wanted to speak as a member of the community on behalf of, or to recognize a teacher that has retired at Los Gatos High School. I think he's one of the finest gentlemen that I've ever met. His name is Scott Downs. He coached the wrestling team and the football team, and he was an art teacher, and he just retired. And he was recently inducted into the Wrestling Hall of Fame. And I just wanted to put on the overhead, this was in, if it's operational, while we're getting that, he was in 2005, the Weekly Times recognized that our town is not really a wrestling town, but that he created a program that was one of the top in the CCS. And what I would like to recognize is that he not only won, but that he won with class. That the wrestlers in a sport where intimidation and those kinds of things occur readily, he taught them a different way. And I also know that the team had some of the best academic findings or results in the CCS. So I just wanted to, he's not here tonight. I tried to get a hold of him, but I just wanted to make that little public comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One other person submitted a card for verbal communications. Okay. All right, I won't complain about clapping once. All right, I have Tony Alleron.
Tony Alarcon, 229 Johnson Avenue. I've been in town since about 91, transplanted from Santa Clara. I wasn't going to speak on the Albright Way today because I tried to drive over there with the project, but after 30 minutes with traffic, I turned around and went home. The public easement on the roads, I would disagree with council members and staff that they say there's no value to that. If I want to walk my dog on the road, you can. I would suggest that you consider, with the open space that's there, opening that open space on the development of the 2.7 acres for public access. Maybe there can be a pathway that we can walk, but I don't think that you should give up that 2.7 acres of land for free and not provide access. He's building this project on that 2.7 acres and making it possible. I must admit, I don't understand how the EIR suggests 350,000 square feet of space and we approved 485. I think in the end, time will tell if it was right or wrong, but I would ask that you consider making the developer stick with 2.7 acres of public access on his property. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to address us on verbal communication on items that are not on our agenda? All right, I have no cards, seeing no one coming forward. We are now moving on to public hearings. Agenda item 10 is the abatement of hazardous vegetation brush. I understand that Kevin Rohani will be making the presentation. Mr. Rohani.
Mayor Spector, members of the council, as a part of the abatement of hazardous vegetation brush in Los Gatos in May of this year, the council adopted a resolution declaring hazardous vegetation brush a public nuisance and declared this evening as a public hearing for this process. This program is something that town of Los Gatos has been involved with and working with the Santa Clara County Fire Department for the past many years in advance of the summertime and the fire season. The program is administered and managed by the fire department, where they inspect properties, provide notices to the residents so they can abate brush around the properties, and if the property owners do not, they have a choice, either have it done by their own resources or the county fire department contractor, and they would be billed. As of this evening, we have not received any objection from any of the residences that had received notices from the Santa Clara County Fire Department for this program. Also with us, we have Ryan Rocker, the Deputy Fire Chief from the County Fire. If there is any question, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Seeing none, this is a public hearing. I have no cards. Does anyone wish to address us on this agenda item? No one's coming forward, so we'll close the public testimony portion of the hearing and turn to the council, noting that we have recommendations on page 1 of our staff report. Do I have a motion? Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move to overrule the non-existing objection and order hazardous vegetation abatement brush.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Agenda item 11. Landscape and Lighting Assessment Districts number 1 and 2. This is also a staff report by Mr. Rohani. Mr. Rohani.
Mayor Spector, members of the council, again, the lighting and landscape maintenance is similar in terms of its longevity with the previous item, hazardous vegetation, that the town has been involved with for many years. Every year we come to you with the implementation of this process. Back in April, the town council initiated the annual review of the lighting and landscape district, and what this is, basically the town hires contractors, that there are select sites around town that they receive enhanced landscaping, lighting, and irrigation services. The cost is paid by the property owners adjoining those parcels, and the town administers those programs. That's been our program for a number of years. Tonight is the public hearing that is set for this. Similar to the previous item, we have not received any objections, good, bad, from all the property owners that have been involved with the lighting and landscape district. That concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any question you may have.
Thank you. And Mr. Larson?
Yes, my only addition would be, after opening and closing the public hearing, items 3 through 8 in the recommendation can be adopted in a single motion, if so noted.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Seeing none, this is also a public hearing. I have no cards, but does anyone from the audience wish to address us on this item? Seeing no one coming forward, we'll close the public testimony portion of this hearing and look to the council for a motion. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I move to approve items 3 through 8 in the staff report and all applicable attachments.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Agenda item 12. This is to consider the introduction of an ordinance to add a new Section 13 to Chapter 14 of the Los Gatos Town Code entitled Firearms Dealers' Sale of Firearms and Ammunition, to require a regulatory permit process for the sale of firearms and ammunition. The staff report will be being made by Judith Propp, our town attorney. We'll begin with Ms. Propp's report. Will be followed by questions, the potential of questions of counsel of the town attorney, and then we will proceed to our town hearing, our public hearing. So, Ms. Propp.
Thank you, Mayor and council members of the public. I'll begin the presentation, and it will be supplemented by Mr. Larson as necessary. As the council recalls, on February 4th, the council convened a council meeting to address the community concerns regarding firearm sales in Los Gatos. After approximately 4 to 5 hours of public comment, the council continued the matter to February 11th, at which time the council adopted recommendations and directed staff to conduct research, study, and return with information necessary to consider potential town ordinances and policy changes to the following items. Designate land use zones for firearm sales, study whether a conditional use permit should be required, consider and study whether the town would want to restrict home occupation permits for firearm sales, establish at that time what we called a police permit process as allowed under state law in the penal code. Also to study and return with information regarding identification checks for the sale of ammunition and or require the reporting of lost or stolen firearms. Thereafter, staff returned on March 4th with a temporary moratorium to place restrictions on allowing new commercial operations for firearm sales until the town had an opportunity to consider the land use issues that council had directed the staff to do so in February. On April 15th this year, council extended the moratorium to allow additional time to study the issues, and the moratorium is currently in effect until February 20th of 2014. Town staff, as based on council direction, anticipates returning to council well in advance of that date to complete the land use issues and have council consider potential regulations. In the meantime, on March 4th, the mayor established a council ad hoc subcommittee to work on the firearms issues with staff and provide direction. The subcommittee, consisting of council members Jensen and Przynski, met on several occasions over the past few months to provide direction to staff on regulations. What the staff and council subcommittee are bringing back tonight is the regulatory permit for the business, not the land use regulations at this time, and the subcommittee has recommended the proposed ordinance tonight for approval. So let's talk about the details of the proposed ordinance, what it is and what it isn't. At this point, staff worked with the council subcommittee to establish a regulatory business permit as allowed under the penal code, which allows a local agency to require a licensing process for the sale of firearms on a retail basis within the town. As proposed, the draft ordinance would require all firearms sellers engaged in retail sales to obtain a permit from the town. In sections 14.130.025 and 14.130.040, The ordinance would establish minimum requirements and standards to obtain a permit, such as the application process, obtaining a federal firearms license, obtaining a state certificate of eligibility. The ordinance, as drafted, also provides for a public hearing process for the approval of all permits on an annual basis, as set forth in Section 14-130.040. Additionally, the proposed ordinance establishes grounds for suspension or revocation based on specific actions or inactions, and that's set forth in Section 14.130.060. In order to make sure that folks had the draft language well in advance of tonight, the town posted the initial draft recommended by the subcommittee on Friday, June 17th, and that was posted to the town's website. Thereafter, based on public comment as well as comments from the council over the past week, minor revisions were made to the draft ordinance, and those were posted on Friday, June 14th on the town's website, as well as discussed in the staff report. The key issues that were added to the draft ordinance included an insurance requirement as set forth in sections 14-130.025 and .040, and that would require any seller of firearms to carry general liability insurance. Additionally, based on comments from council, there was clarification of the of destructive devices as set forth in both the definition section as well as whether or not that would be grounds for permit as set forth in 14.130.035 subsection J. What's not before the council tonight and will be coming forward at a later date as directed by council is regulations concerning land use. Council directed the staff to return with land use zones for sale of firearms within the town, consider proximity to schools, parks, and other selected establishments that may have sensitive receptors, consider whether home occupation permits for the sale of firearms are appropriate, and those are anticipated to return by way of, since they're land use regulations, those need to proceed to Planning Commission for consideration and a recommendation, and then we'll be returning to council for a final consideration and direction, and either adoption or modifications. Time frame for that, working with the council ad hoc subcommittee, is to have proposed land use regulations in August that could proceed to Planning Commission, and then we would anticipate, depending on the council schedule, those would be returning to the council in early fall, as possibly as early as September. Council also directed staff to consider other regulations, including identification checks for sale of ammunition and require reporting or lost stolen firearms. Those also will be vetted by the council subcommittee and returning as appropriate in the fall, along with land use regulations or shortly thereafter as directed by the council subcommittee. In addition to the potential regulations that the council is working on, as set forth in the staff report, there are a myriad of bills that are still pending in the state legislature, and action is anticipated at some point, although that hasn't been determined since they're still in committee. We've summarized a number of the bills that are pending. Staff at this point has recommended to the subcommittee that these issues not be addressed at the town level until there's clarification from the state whether or not there's likely legislation that's adopted. And again, the staff report, which is available tonight and also was on the website for the town and will still remain posted, summarizes a brief summary of some of the pending legislation. Tonight, what's before the council is just the regulatory permit process as allowed under the penal code. After public comment and council questions and consideration, the council has a variety of actions that it may take is to either introduce the ordinance recommended by the council ad hoc subcommittee. Alternatives are that you could introduce an ordinance with modifications as you did in the last matter, or continue the matter with specific direction to staff, or take no action and not adopt the ordinance. Staff is available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Prop. Questions? Mr. Brzezinski.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to get a clarification, further clarification from the attorney and the staff regarding what we can and cannot talk about tonight. Because I think there was some confusion I read in some of the emails we got that indicated that the land use component was kind of an assumption or expectation of one of the issues we would take up tonight. And given the fact it is land use and given the fact that it goes to the Planning Commission before it comes to us, want to make sure we know that we as a body would be restricted from discussing the specific issues of that land use regulation. Could you clarify what those would be?
That's correct. The public notice that was published for tonight and the issue before the council is just the regulatory permit ordinance. As directed by council, the land use studies are still ongoing as far as zoning and other related matters such as a conditional use permit or home occupation, whether that's appropriate for firearm sales. Those are being worked on with staff in the subcommittee. Those, when available, will be made available to the public. Will then proceed to Planning Commission for their consideration, comments, and recommendations to council, and then return to council. So you are correct that the land use matters are not before the council tonight.
Ms. Jensen.
I have a related question. To the extent that the land use, one of the things you put up in your bullet was the potential of a conditional use permit. So to the extent that there is a land use ordinance that's proposed which contains a permitting process as well, how is that going to be coordinated with the regulatory ordinance if we adopt that tonight? Will there be reference to two permits required? The land use and the regulatory will be required to come back with an amendment to the regulatory so that they can be cross-referenced? How does staff contemplate handling that?
Staff will be discussing that with the council ad hoc subcommittee, and depending on their recommendation and direction, that is certainly a possibility that if and when the council adopts any land use regulations, that thereafter, if any regulations are adopted that require additional requirements, those could be cross-referenced in this regulatory ordinance by way of an amendment that would also come before the council at a public hearing.
Further questions of staff?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Larson.
If I could ask the clerk to push number 3 and hit return. Just going back to the original council direction, keep going back. One more. There. So the first 3 items on there all require changes to the zoning code, and by law those have to go to the Planning Commission first. What we're really presenting tonight through the ad hoc committee is a broadened establish a police permit. It's a regulatory permitting process that council has authority to act. The 4th one, the identification checks for the sale of ammunition. We provided the state legislative update, SB 53, I believe it is, actually would require that on a statewide basis, precluding and preempting any necessity of local action. And the last item will be, we have dealt with that for firearms retailers in the recommended regulatory permitting process, but there's a broader question of reporting lost or stolen firearms that will come to the ad hoc committee when they're complete with the land use review.
Further questions? Mr. Brzezinski.
And just to clarify also, staff, the moratorium we have in place for any new establishments of this nature is in effect till February 20, 2014, and would be in effect until such time as the council establishes and approves those things that would then be considered in the land use component. Is that not correct?
That's correct. If council were to adopt land use regulations, then the moratorium would expire.
Thank you.
Other questions of staff? I have one on page 3 of 9 at the top, subparagraph 1. The reference is made to the applicant's name. And further on in that sentence, it talks about partnerships and corporations. I would anticipate knowing the names if it's a partnership of the partners, if it's a corporation of the shareholders, but this, in my reading, this sub 1 doesn't say that. So I was wondering if what the staff's input was.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. In section .015 on definitions on the first page, page 1 of 9, you have it as on the ordinance on page 1 of 9 on section .015, it defines applicant as any person or any officer, director, employee, or agent of a business or a business entity who applies for a permit to sell, lease, or transfer firearms, firearm components, ammunition, or destructive devices. As you referenced on page 3 of 9, the permit process requires an application to include the name of any individual or of any partnership or business entity. If the council so desires, you could modify that for clarification and add language specifically so that all applications include the names of individual applicants, all partnerships or other business entities, and every individual who has an interest in the partnership or the business entity.
All right, thank you. Ms. Jensen.
I apologize for the minor editing, but what we've received as a proposal is titled Article 13, Firearms Dealers, and I know that there was discussion in making references throughout the proposed ordinance to what this was, a chapter, a division, whatever. Would it be appropriate to call it an article since it's Article 13?
The town code is published by Code Publishing, and they format the ordinances to be consistent with the numbering. And in checking after this ordinance was published, all of our other ordinances are entitled article, and we'll defer to our publisher for final formatting to make sure it's consistent with the rest of the town code.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of staff? All right, I'm going to begin the public testimony in a second. I see many familiar faces, and so I have a lot of people who have indicated that they are going to be speaking this evening, but even though there are a lot of you, I have made the determination you will each have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. I also note that there are some of you who have signs, which is totally appropriate and acceptable. However, what I would ask is that you not lift them and wave them because that is distracting to the public process and impedes it. And lastly, if you're speaking and you have someone here that agrees with you and you know that, you can just possibly use their names or have them raise their hand. That way we can keep the process going as expeditiously and reasonable as possible. So having said that, oh, and there will be no clapping. We clapped a little while ago, but not at this portion of the hearing. We want to maintain as much decorum as we possibly can. So my first person speaking will be Amy Goldsmith, and she will be followed by John Riley. Ms. Goldsmith.
Good evening, Council. I wanted to thank you for the draft of the new ordinance, and also thank you for clarifying why there were portions like the land use that were not included. I didn't understand that particularly well, but I'm grateful to know that those are coming. I just wanted to thank you for your attention to the issue and for your hard work, and I'm going to, that's all I need to tell you.
Thank you. And one thing I forgot to say is you don't have to use your entire 3 minutes. All right, John Riley, followed by Benjamin Cogan.
Yeah, I turned in the card late, so I didn't expect it to come up so soon. But I wanted to just address a few issues that should be considered in creating the language for the new ordinances. I have noticed that on the from Templar Sports has utilized different avenues of sales, especially the internet sales for certain types of items that seem very threatening to the community. One of the issues, and I mentioned this last time, was that they sell the M4 carbine lower receivers, and they're often sold 80% machined, so then that allows them to sell without having a serial number on the item. And then in light of last week's shooting in Santa Monica, was a weapon that was found there that was non-serialized, so they weren't able to trace it back to whoever sold the gun. So I think Templar Sports or any other new firearms seller in Los Gatos should serialize their items. And so since Templar is a manufacturer of M4 carbine rifles, and that's their main sales, I think it would be good that they are required to be 100% machined at the on site. Also, I think we should limit the amount of the types of guns that are sold. In the past, machine guns, one that was called a HK-23E, that was sold through Templar Sports. There are also submachine guns, such as this one here, which is it's called this one's a Polish-Russian submachine gun sold by Templar Sports, and I don't know if this is legal in California, but I think it would be good to investigate the legality of selling submachine guns and how they get around the existing methods. Is before they would go to new items for sale. Now they refer people to go to the Facebook account or to calguns.net.
Thank you. Thank you. Benjamin Cogan, followed by Michael Payne.
Hello, Council. I was here in the beginning. I know you all know who I am, so thank you for being here. I do support Templar Sports, but my issue is not about the store. My issue is This whole controversy started because it was like, the people were like, well, we didn't know and all this stuff. And so then we've created all this stuff that we're doing. So if the issue is Templar Sports, if you don't think they did what they're supposed to, then deal with that. But now what you're doing, I see as a threat to the Second Amendment and the freedom to our country as a whole. And the Almaden gun exchange, the ATF came and stopped them, and now you want to do a fee for bullets. So you're going to have to do all this stuff for bullets. And I just going to ask you, who is really in charge? Are you guys in charge, or are these people in charge? I am really confused. But these guys are giving you orders. I want you to represent the people. I want you to listen to me. I want you to listen to my constituents. What if Los Gatos was a beacon of light, was a beacon of hope, and was a beacon of freedom? What if, and let me just ask one question. How many people here would like firearm sales in Los Gatos or in general? By a show of hands, raise your hand if you support the Second Amendment and would like firearm sales in Los Gatos. That way you can see it's at least 50% or more. So, did NBC get that? Did you get that? Because transparency is important these days, and there's a lot of world factors going on. I don't know if you guys know, but there's the United Nations. They have the UN arms ban. They have Agenda 21. That sounds like, ooh, Agenda 21. But it's involved with Planned Bay Area. It's going to be appointed by ABAG, and they have they're not voted in. I look to you, Barbara Specter. Like, you're the hope. You're the gleam of Los Gatos. You as well, Jensen, and forgive me, I'm stuttering, I'm not saying names right, but you as well, Joe, and Steve, and McMutt, you guys been here from the beginning. This land use and all this stuff in school zones, it's more control, it's more power. It takes away our freedom, and we don't have a way to fight back. The whole reason the Second Amendment is put in the Constitution, which I know all of you swore to protect and uphold against invaders, foreign and domestic, is the Second Amendment. And I just urge you to think about everything, because everyone says, oh, think of the children. You leave us defenseless, and then we got to go through Germany and FEMA and Department of Homeland Security buying 1.6 billion hollow point bullets. That's enough bullets for all of us 3-4 times. You tell me where the freedom is. I want to defend you guys. I want to defend the police officers. I want to defend the schools. If I saw wrongdoing, I would stop it, and I would hope you give me that option and freedom.
Thank you. Michael Payne, followed by Gloria Strong.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I moved to this town about 10 years ago, and I want to say I'm a great supporter of this town and many things we do in the Los Gatos Lions Club. I'm not here on behalf of the Lions Club. I'm here on behalf of myself. But I can tell you, as a law-abiding citizen, I purchased my weapons. The Chamber of Commerce says, buy locally. I want to buy locally. Closing this place down, regulating it out of business, over-regulating it any greater than any other business that's law-abiding in this city, I think is wrong, because you're sending me to spend my money out of the community, and I will still be bringing that weapon back into my home. It's not going to change that fact. I'm a law-abiding citizen and can purchase those weapons. There's already federal and state regulations that far outweighs what we do for alcohol, what we do for tobacco, and what we do for vehicles, and those kill many more people than guns have ever killed in this community. So please, with that, take into consideration a legal business that's already heavily regulated more than any other by the federal and the state government, and give us our rights to spend money locally and support our local community and put those taxes and dollars back into this town. Thank you.
Thank you. Gloria Strong, and then Hans Janssen.
Why is the Los Gatos City Council so afraid of Templar Sports that they need to design special laws to persecute it? Are you aware that the idea of freedom in the context of government includes the idea that laws must apply uniformly and not be passed to suit the whim of any person or group? This is the idea on which our country was founded. The Second Amendment is just one expression of this. What has this body so afraid that you would even think of turning against freedom? Thank you.
Thank you. Hans Jonsson and Nikki McAllister.
Good evening. My name is Hans Josens. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of myself and my 17-year-old son, who's also here. I've been a resident, or I've had a Los Gatos resident address for over 40 years. Went to Los Gatos schools. I've worked in Los Gatos. And I want to thank you for the opportunity for being here. Law enforcement resources are being taxed more and more heavily every year, adding another layer of scrutiny on top of the State Department of Justice and the federal BATFE would not only be doubly redundant, it would take away resources from the LGPD that could be better used elsewhere. Perhaps those efforts should be used to educate town residents on firearm safety. On the subject of safety, it has become obvious to me in my attending these meetings and that some of the people in the council chambers now and in past meetings are utterly ignorant of firearms. I believe that some of these people are sitting on the council right now. For any council member to make any decisions regarding the regulation of a business selling products about which they are utterly ignorant is wrong. It's an abuse of their power. I urge you, if you are ignorant about firearms, please, for the love of God, educate yourself. Lost my place here. Educate yourself before making these decisions that could very well destroy another legal and profitable business in Los Gatos. I recall Barry Cinnamon and Akina Solar. A battle of 2 or 3 years ensued over the ignorance of the town council over the fact that solar panels are not, by definition, mechanical, and therefore would be allowed on rooftops in this town. Here, over 10 years later, solar is now embraced in Los Gatos. People have become educated. Yet Akina Solar is no longer contributing to the town coffers. They are no more as a business. The town council has stated on several occasions that Templar Sports would be exempt from any new ordinances that might be enacted, setting aside the fact that any new ordinances would undoubtedly be overly burdensome and redundant to state and federal law, in addition to being unnecessary. Given these facts, it is obvious to me that any entrepreneur who might have considered opening a business in competition with Templar Sports obviously has been frightened off by these threats against the legal firearms business in Los Gatos. Your anti-business work is done there. It's not necessary to apply these proposed resolutions to Templar Sports. To do so would be punitive. Have some conviction of your promise. As to restrictions on ammunition purchases and requirement for ID checks in order to purchase ammunition, I would submit that virtually none of the ammunition used in crimes was legally purchased. The same is true of firearms used in crimes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nikki McAllister and then Don Wolf.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Nikki McAllister of 15612 Caven Lane, Los Gatos. I'd like to say that I'm extremely disappointed that the issue of the location of firearms retailers in Los Gatos has not been addressed to date, and what we've heard tonight is not being a part of this meeting. For me, this is a very important issue, and I have a hard time understanding how it's been lost in the 3 months since the ad hoc committee was formed. Firearms retailers should not be allowed to operate near schools, parks, places serving young people, and government buildings. The town manager states that we have to wait for this issue to be worked on. It's got to go to the planning committee. Hopefully we might get an answer in the fall. Who knows? I believe that an applicable land use permit can be referenced in the current proposed ordinances before us, even without the land uses permit's content being determined. It could be similar to that of Lafayette's 8650B. That says that the requirement for a permit under this article is in addition to the requirement for a land use permit for firearm sales activity. No person may engage in firearm sales activity without both an applicable land use permit from the Planning Commission or City Council and a permit under this article. It took over 3 months to get the 9 pages drafted here tonight. I urge the Town Council to, at a very minimum, require the staff, the ad hoc committee and the planning committee to address the land use issue and to set a deadline tonight for a resolution to this. I also urge that the Town Council recognise that there must be a reference in these ordinances now before us to an applicable land use permit for the sale of firearms. Finally, I'd like to remind the Council the vision statement in the Los Gatos General Plan states, "Los Gatos is home. People feel safe here. Let's keep it that way." Thank you.
Thank you. Don Wolf and then Alexander Malcolm.
Good evening. I'm Don Wolf. I've been a resident of the Los Gatos area forever. I have 5 children who graduated from Los Gatos High. I've got grandchildren who graduated from Los Gatos High. I have grandchildren going to Los Gatos schools today. So I'm very interested in the safety of our children. I've also been robbed 4 times in Los Gatos. My wife was violently robbed once in Los Gatos by criminals from outside of Los Gatos. So I'm kind of interested in the safety of our people and our ability to defend ourselves. A few years ago, I want to tell you about a story about my niece. My sister's daughter, Carla, was working in a hospital one night, delivering a baby. She and another nurse and a doctor were delivering a baby. It was after midnight, and the hospital was locked up, and there was a big sign outside, "No guns allowed." You know, everybody felt safe. And a guy came in and shot a hole in the emergency room door, came in. The doctor fled. He was there to kill the doctor, but he was gone. The doctor had tied his wife's tubes after he delivered her 12th child and had decided she was going to die if she got pregnant again. So the doctor was gone, but he had a backup plan. He took 2 nurses hostage, including my niece, took them outside, made them load hundreds of pounds of dynamite onto a gurney, and took it or they were going to take it in the hospital. By now the police were coming. They were only 15 minutes away, and they were coming, and Carla, my niece, felt confident that they would get there in time. And the guy got distracted, and so she grabbed his shotgun, and instead of killing him, because the police were right there, she didn't even shoot him in the crotch so he'd be disabled. But she emptied the gun in the ground, but he had another backup plan. He had a pistol, he killed her. So my niece Carla is dead because she was an expert with guns, because the rule was no guns were safe. So a few years before that, I was on a hunting expedition, and a bullet went by my right ear, missed me by inches. I dropped, and another bullet went where my head had been a second before. But I had my 15-shot semi-automatic with me, and I'm here tonight because I had my automatic with me.
Thank you.
So I don't think passing this ordinance that I've read is going to do anything disabling, the citizens of Los Gatos from being able to defend themselves. Is ridiculous. In fact, I find it would be almost conspiratorial. If you pass that,
Mr. Wolf, I'm going to have to ask you.
you wouldn't go into
Mr. Wolf?
the history's world decisions.
Mr. Wolf, please be considerate to all the other folks who want to
Okay,
chat with us.
I've got 1 second. But you certainly would be candidates for Los Gatos Council's worst decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alexander Malcolm, followed by Ted Simpson.
Good evening. I'm willing to bet that many of you in favor of this ordinance, whether you will admit it or not, fear this store that's opened in your town from a place of ignorance of the world of firearms, especially as it pertains to the state of California. Let me explain a few things to you really quickly to hopefully give you some perspective on why this local ordinance is a waste of time, money, and energy. First, let me get this out of the way. The Brady campaign, one of the more popular and well-known anti-gun lobbies in the United States, has consistently ranked California as the best state in the U.S. to live if you like a great deal of gun control. The laws in California are consistently much, much higher than those of most any other state. This fact alone is not what makes the proposed ordinance such a bad idea, however. This ordinance is the very definition of a redundant, feel-good piece of legislation to satisfy those of you who have insisted on having what is essentially a big group therapy session here tonight. And let's be honest, that's what it really is. You're afraid of and concerned about something that you don't fully understand, so here we are. What are you afraid of? That this shop is some kind of evil arms dealership, supplying weapons to African dictatorships and rebel militias? This gun shop that has opened up in your town is already in compliance with a whole slew of federal, state, and local laws and ordinances. I've made a cursory reading of the draft and found that the things this ordinance would do have already been addressed by the aforementioned state, federal, and local laws. As a holder of a federal firearms license, the ATF is allowed to audit them once a year for no reason, whenever they want, just because they feel like it. They can drop in and do that. Any misconduct on the part of Templar Sports would and could lead to them losing their federal firearms license, which would essentially close them down. This means that the rights, freedom, and the way each employee makes a living is already potentially on the line. Requiring them to submit to inspections by local law enforcement is a waste of time and resources. Your police must have better things to do with their time than conduct redundant inspections of this business. The other major requirement set in the proposed ordinance is also redundant. The state of California already requires everyone wishing to transfer a firearm to go through a federal firearms license, which includes the paperwork, background check, fees, and a 10-day waiting period. There's no such thing as a private sale or transfer in California, not legally anyways. As I said, we now have a registry for all firearms. What's more, the exact wording of the ordinance is questionable. I'm not an attorney, but I don't like it. It seems to, sorry. What's more, the exact wording of the ordinance could mean that anyone wishing to sell a rifle or other gun to their friend would have to seek this local permit before then going to the federal firearms license holder, where they would be subjected to background checks, fees, and waiting periods anyways. The relevant section 14-130-020, for the purposes of this chapter, engaging in the business of and selling or transferring firearms or ammunition includes the infrequent sale or transfer, offer, exposing for sale, or advertising of firearms, ammunition, and or destructive devices.
Thank you.
And that's it.
Thank you. Ted Simpson, followed by Julie Maya.
Hello, my name is Ted Simpson. It's a pretty tough speech to follow there. As I said, my name is Ted Simpson. I am not a resident of Los Gatos. I'm a resident of San Jose. However, I am a full-time and then some employee of Templar Sports. I sold my own business off and came to work for Templar because it was something I believed in. It was people I liked. I understand the desire for the council to have a review process for a gun shop. I get that. I mean, you have to do a public review for nail salons. So a gun shop, why not? I read this 8 or 9 page ordinance, and quite frankly, it gave me a splitting headache because it seemed very redundant and nonsensical at best. Most of the information in there is, as was mentioned, it's already covered under California state and federal laws. We were just audited by the ATF, and as a new gun store, we scored an A by the ATF, which is pretty much unheard of for new gun shops. I think that speaks pretty highly of the professionalism of Templar Sports, our desire to follow the law to the letter. What really boggles my mind, I guess, is that although we have concurred with every law at a state and federal level, we're still held to this extraordinary scrutiny by the city of Los Gatos, where Templar provides employment for 15 people. This, what seems very obvious to me to be an end run to put us out of business for what seems to be personal agendas, which I surely hope is not the case. I just don't get this. Madam Mayor, I recall you saying that Templar was basically exempt because we went through the proper processes. We pulled the proper permits. We got the proper authorization from the police chief, from everyone. We went through all legal channels, as you yourself said we did. And yet, if I'm understanding this ordinance, that is now reversed, and this is going to be retroactive. And I know you guys are going to pass this tonight. I don't think anyone here is under the illusion of anything else. So it can only be construed as an end run or, you know, just some retroactive piece of legislation to specifically put us out of business. We're the only gun shop. So who else could you possibly be talking about? That's it. I hope you seriously consider this, because for me, I don't feel like being unemployed yet again. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie Mayer or Maya, and then James Creighton.
Good evening. I'm Julie Maya. I've lived in Los Gatos for 23 years. I want to thank Marcia Jensen and Joe Brzezinski for your hard work on this document. And I'm sorry that I'm going to have to talk about some of the ways that I think it needs even more work. One of the crucial things, I think, would be to add the language that Nikki McAllister earlier suggested. I think that that would give everyone who is concerned about land use falling by the wayside, not happening, would make sure that we are reassured that that will indeed occur. The two things that I would like to see strengthened in this document, although I understand that that could be done after passage as a revision of it, but I think that any gun dealer has a responsibility to make sure that guns are kept out of the hands of unsupervised children, of people who are suffering from mental instability, and from people who have a history of criminal violence. And I would suggest that there are two areas that you could strengthen. One is security. The document that we are considering has only one sentence that deals with how weapons will be secured in a business. And I've compared this with other documents from surrounding communities. They deal much more in depth with security. I'm particularly disturbed that there's a mention of security cameras, but the tapes for those cameras only have to be kept for 60 days. Other communities, Campbell, for example, requires that those tapes be kept for a full year. And I'd just like to point out that this would be in the benefit of the business because it's a way of discouraging theft. Then the other area that I think needs strengthening is records keeping and the reporting of an inventory to law enforcement. This is a way of encouraging the business to partner with our local law enforcement to keep gun trafficking out of Los Gatos and to make sure that all guns that pass through a legal business are fully accounted for. So please consider those strengthenings of this document. Thank you.
Thank you. James Creighton, and then Robert Shackelford.
Yes, I'm Jim Creighton, and my wife and I have lived in the Almond Grove for a number of years. The thing that confuses me tonight is all of the "We support Templar Sports" signs, because my understanding is this ordinance isn't about Templar Sports. Templar Sports is here, and it's subject to all the rules that the city had in place at the time and complied, and that's been the decision. So the question is, why all the fuss about supporting Templar Sports? Now, the one section that is in here that I believe would apply is the suspension and revocation section. And I'm not even sure legally, since this ordinance would be passed after Templar Sports was be permitted, whether this even applies to Templar Sports. That would be an interesting question. Basically, I'd like to commend the council for what it's done so far, to thank you, to urge the passage of the ordinance. I particularly applaud the public hearing requirement. I think we've all learned some, and having it a built-in requirement of the process is a useful thing to do. The one area in which I consider you might look at strengthening it is in the whole issue of assault weapons and so forth. There are many in this town for whom there's a division between firearms that are personal weapons and firearms that are essentially weapons of war. California state law is quite rigid on this count, and it occurs to me that while there's some reference in 065 to must comply with the California Penal Code, that there might be some language in 060, the revocation and suspension thing, that the permittee must continue to comply at all times with California state law. There could be some working in there if there are already inspections the federal government is doing and so on. Perhaps that could be proof of compliance and so forth. But it strikes me that there is a way to strengthen this, since I believe the assault weapons is an issue of major concern. Thank you.
Bob Shackelford, San Jose, California. I want to thank the Antis for inviting me here again to speak in favor of Templar Sports, as has been the case the last 3 times. I came here expecting to see a positive ordinance, one that focuses on thresholds, standards, occupancy requirements, basically setting a high bar. Instead, when I pulled this out and started reading it a couple days ago, my brain immediately popped out 2 words, and the 2 words my brain popped out were thought police. Now, I found myself wondering, why is my brain immediately popping those 2 words out? And my brain said to me, do a substitution exercise. So I did. For firearms and firearms dealer, I substituted the words nursery and nursery employees. And suddenly, now you have a list required for all employees to handle sodium cyanide, potassium, potash, 2-cycle motor oil, kerosene, and take too many trips to the restroom in order to crystallize urea, which is a catalyst and explosive. That's the thought police, what people might do. I did the exercise again. I replaced the words firearms dealer and firearms employees with photography studio and photography studio employees. And what do I get? A requirement for a list of employees who might be in contact with children while doing a photography session, because who knows, that studio might just become a producer of child porn. That's the thought police in action. What might happen? I took it one step further, and the Swiss cheese hole started to appear. I put in the words pharmacy, pharmacist, and pharmacy again for location. And suddenly what I get, the town of Los Gatos wants to do the job of the State Board of Pharmacy for State of California, start inspecting pharmacies, which is only the business of the State Board of California for pharmacy. This is a negative ordinance, not a positive ordinance. You had an opportunity as people whose responsibility is to uphold, defend, and promote liberty to do something positive. such as have a requirement that Mr. Ching communicate with the chief of police when a prohibited person gets rejected for a firearms purchase, instead of waiting on the DOJ, which tends to drag its feet or legs doing their job, et cetera, et cetera. This is unacceptable. It needs to be shredded, and I really appreciate if the town council for the city of Los Gatos, town of Los Gatos, would start all over and take this up from a positive angle in support of the Constitution of the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you. Jess Guy or Guy, and then Khalil Varner.
Mayor, members of the town council. When I walked out of my house tonight, my wife looked at me and said, "Again?" I said, "Yes, dear." She said, "Are you going to go back later, some other date?" I said, "Yes, dear." And then she said, "For one gun shop?" I said, "Yes, dear." I say yes, dear to my wife a lot, but I've read this document, and it would appear from a reading of it that we will all be back here more than once. I have concerns about many of the aspects of this ordinance. I presented a couple of pages of thoughts. I believe, hopefully, the council has got copies of those. To go into them tonight would take over half an hour, maybe even an hour. I'm not going to do that. I would request the council members, especially the ad hoc members, evaluate those concerns I presented. Adopt, modify, or reject them. It's up to you. But please pay attention to them. There are a couple of items of concern I did want to address. One was the requirement that the renewal permit process of an existing firearms dealer duplicate the same process as an original application, including a public hearing. Really? We've had 6 months of public hearings on an existing gun shop, and we still haven't reached any conclusion. If we come back every year to hold public hearings to discuss renewals of applications, that's about all this town council may have to do for the next 5 or 6 years. I think we need to carefully consider the renewal process and apply some common sense to it. I'm ready to come back and talk about it. On April 5th of this year, the town manager presented an emergency ordinance proposal. In that proposal, he suggested that the town should take into consideration certain items so they do not duplicate state or federal law. Well, this document certainly does. Further, the town manager observed that a significant commitment of staff to the project would be necessary, and I suppose that's why there are 2 separate agencies within the town of Los Gatos to do this process, besides the chief of police and 1 other agency, and those fees, of course, offset by permit fees, to pay for all of this research and evaluation. In attachment 2, the town manager also stated that community members should be addressed to evaluate and impact some of these suggestions. I'd like to know who those community members were. Thank you.
Thank you. Khalil Varner, and then Robert Sutterfeld, or Field. Khalil Varner. All right, no one came forward. Robert Sutterfield, and then Bonnie Williams.
Good evening, I'm Robert Sutterfield. I'm a former resident of Los Gatos, currently living in Campbell, although I do enjoy bringing my commerce to your fair city, including purchasing goods at this sporting goods establishment. Several points that will be disjointed, but I need to get through them fast. The Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986 protects not only the owners but also the federal firearms licensees from excessive punitive inspections which were being perpetrated by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. I don't believe that local inspections would pass muster with that. Local requirements wastefully duplicate the existing federal and state laws. For example, the local requirements regarding lost and stolen firearms, the mechanism effectively criminalizes the victim whose firearm is stolen from them. Mr. Guy's extensive letter outlines a few of those. From a business point of view, it is unfair to retroactively penalize lawfully established businesses. And yes, this does make a re-permitting process. There's a paragraph that requires this. This sets up a strongly anti-business climate and effectively discouraging small business investment, which we all want in our communities. This is all a backdoor, strike that. It's a very transparent attempt to simply restrict Los Gatos citizens' rights to keep and bear arms for their own self-defense, as this gentleman pointed out. That right is supported even against local ordinances, for example, by the D.C. versus Heller decision in 2008, the Supreme Court. Please see the letter also in your packet from Michel and Associates that represents this gun shop and several other entities. If you are concerned about violence, which includes firearm violence, which is, by the way, unrelated to this store, bad guys don't buy guns from federal firearms licensees. They don't go, it's too much paperwork. It's much easier to get it down in the corner. If you are concerned about firearms violence, as several others have suggested, please take advantage of opportunities to become knowledgeable about firearms. Take Templar themselves up on their offer of education and assistance to become more knowledgeable about the issues. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Bonnie Williams and then Cindy Schneider.
Bonnie Williams. Thank you for letting me speak to you once again. I am very concerned about small town after small town across this country trying to take every small gun shop out to the edges of the town and then finally push them out of town. We need access to our guns. I can't wait to be able to afford one. People are so afraid in this town that I remember some of the arguments they had in February, just afraid to walk by the store. I mean, what's that all about? I see all this proposal you have as a big discrimination against this business and this industry for no reason at all. If people are afraid of dying, is that what their concept of the guns is, only because of dying? Then they better worry about every restaurant and bar in town, because I'm sure there are drunks are drinking regularly in Los Gatos and getting in their car that people aren't aware of that. You know, you should be afraid of that. And maybe they should be brought before you once a year to justify why they should have a permit to operate in town. I mean, it's just so extreme to think we're going to have people come up and complain every year. It's just so counterproductive to them trying to operate their business, because how do they plan to have renew their lease? How do they plan to buy supplies to sell? Because we don't know if we're going to have a shop here in 6 months, because we got to go through this long process once a year, and it's bringing for, you know, it's like be going to a tribunal every year to see if we can justify your existence here. Something that's just so wrong with all of that. Let's talk about the revenue they're generating. The town gets back, what, somewhere between 0.5% and 1% of the sales tax they're generating comes back to this town. So we're saying, you know, we're sort of enjoying taking your money in right now, but we really don't want you here as a business. We're really trying to get you out to the edges to appease half the people that were here complaining throughout the February meetings, which I attended. So maybe we should give them back that sales tax revenue they're generating, because they need it all to support their lawyers over and over again to come before you to justify their existence. Okay, just remember, more, you know, I'd say about half the people were here for the Second Amendment and for having a gun shop in our town. It wasn't everybody against them. And yet this ordinance is fully backing the people that were anti-gun. Well, they should not be aware, you know, pay attention to the Second Amendment and soft tyranny, because it's coming. That's not being an alarmist, it's for real. People need to pay attention. And the extra costs that we'd be expending every year, all these gentlemen tonight said it so eloquently, the cost of monitoring these laws and having our police chief do this and having people do inspections, just beyond imagination, because we already have the federal and state laws before us. Can't believe I said that all in less than 3 minutes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Cindy Schneider and then Lori Pastrone.
Good evening. Cindy Schneider, Los Gatos resident for 27 years.
The town staff states that the land use restrictions cannot occur now with regard to firearms dealers, and that state law requires such zoning issues to go to the Planning Commission first. That may or may not be true. If it is true, I ask, why has this not been worked on in tandem with the ordinances suggested here? Whatever the case, this issue of a land use requirement is an extremely important issue, one that cannot be set aside for some non-date specific time, potentially resulting in little or no action. The location issue must and can be addressed in this draft ordinance now. At minimum, at this point, the ordinances need, and legally can, state that the permit requirements under Article 13 are in addition to any applicable local land use requirement permits for firearm sales, and that no one may engage in firearm sales in Los Gatos without all applicable federal, state, and town license and permits. For the sake of simplicity in drafting, I direct the Town Council to propose Section 14.130.025B. To simply address this issue, there would be a small insertion of the words, any applicable local land use permits in the second line, just after the word certificates. The insertion incorporates the issue and leaves the Planning Commission with the Town Council to determine the content of such land use permits. I urge the town to work on the land use permit requirement now so as to provide for a meaningful code governing firearm sales in Los Gatos. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori Pastrone and then Deborah Weinstein.
Thank you. My name is Lori Pastrone. I live on Dishman Drive in Los Gatos. Madam Mayor, thank you, and Town Council. I appreciate this opportunity. I think we all do, to lift our voice. I moved to Los Gatos only 2 years ago, but my husband grew up here, and we left for 11 years, and we lived in Europe. And I really appreciate the act, the freedom that we have to express how we feel about our community. And I think it's those feelings of community that brought us back to Los Gatos. And I know in raising 2 children here, what's important to me is that we have neighbors and friends and teachers and members of the police that we know our children can be around and that we can trust to create that continuity in our community. And it's because of that that I think we're all here. And we can't brush these issues aside because they are very evocative. And what we are here about, for those of us who live in Los Gatos and who are raising children here, it's about the community we create for our children and the legacy that we leave here in this town for them. And there's just one comment that I want to make relative to the public hearing in the amendment. I'm glad to see that there's the opportunity for public hearing, but I would like to just have clarified then, after the public hearing in the future, who actually votes on any additional arms dealers that may be in town. And because of how evocative this is this not something that in the future should go to a town vote? Why not, as members of the community, couldn't we vote on any new establishments like this? I mean, clearly these meetings could go on, but I believe it's for the members of this community, the residents of Los Gatos who pay taxes here. They should be the ones voting on whether or not we have an establishment such as Templar or other establishments in the future in our town. And then finally, I do encourage you to quickly pass or combine the land use permits requirements with this ordinance so that that doesn't get lost along the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Deborah Weinstein, followed by Scott. Ooh. Ooh.
Well, that was dramatic. Thank you.
Do you need to still?
No, I'm good. I'm good. For now, anyway. Well, sorry about the dramatic entry here. Thank you for preparing this draft regarding permitting the sale of firearms and ammunition in our town. I know a lot of work has been done to present this draft, and I personally appreciate this effort. I spoke to many families today, and I personally received over 50 emails of support of this, and people who said they wanted to come, but they could not. There are a few troubling omissions concerning the permitting process, one of which has already been vetted a few times, so I'll just mention I support. It feels kind of premature to be adopting a permit without a fully vetted land use permit associated to this. I'm just wondering why we haven't really more accurately indicated in this draft that another land use permit would be required. And then I additionally have a couple of concerns regarding security. That was already mentioned before, but I also agree that the security camera records should be kept for much longer than 60 days if we ever need to use that for law enforcement purposes. In addition, it seems to me that we would want to act similarly to Campbell in requiring more extensive record and reporting requirements. So I just want to thank you for this effort that you've been making and let you know that there are many families that support your efforts. Thank you.
Scott, followed by Chris Potter.
Okay. Mayor Spector, members of the council, I've lived in Los Gatos for 9 years. Let's get down to brass tacks. Templar Sports has caused exactly 0 harm to the town of Los Gatos. The only actual harm that was cited in your urgency ordinance were protests that were organized by Templar's opponents. That's kind of blaming the victim. Here's an analogy. It's not a stretch to imagine that we have hundreds of parents here in Los Gatos who are vegans. Let's suppose they have taught their children to be vegans. What would you do if those parents got together and asked you to pass an ordinance that would permanently close Togo's and Mr. Pickles because their innocent vegan children, when they walk home from school, have to walk by a store that sells sandwiches that contain meat? Now we come to section 14.130.030 part E5. This section defines who cannot work in a gun store. Your staff has cleverly written this so that people who legally use medical marijuana are probably exempt. But what about people, say, in their 40s who were convicted of possessing a couple of marijuana joints when they were 19 years old? Are you saying that a single conviction for marijuana possession 25 years ago means you can never work in a gun store in Los Gatos? If you use cocaine, you can still end up being president of the United States. And by the way, that's from Dreams of My Father by Barack Obama. However, I've saved the best for last. As the other speakers have mentioned, this proposed ordinance not only forces Templar Sports to obtain a permit to sell firearms, but it also requires them to go through the permit process every year and be subject to a hearing every year in order to keep that permit. I consulted with a friend of mine this morning who's on the city council in Perrysburg, Ohio. He said that instead of writing a 9-page ordinance, you should just ban gun stores entirely. If President Obama gets to replace, say, Clarence Thomas with someone like, say, Hillary Clinton, such an ordinance would probably get an A-OK from the United States Supreme Court. Mayor Spector, members of the council, this ordinance is an assault weapon against law-abiding citizens, law-abiding gun owners in Los Gatos. Please vote no on this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Potter and then Jeff Klopotik.
I'm a resident of Los Gatos for the last 17 years, homeowner, and I appreciate the ordinances that have come forward for review tonight. The way I read it, there's nothing in these ordinances drafted before us that states that people are being precluded in any way of their Second Amendment rights to bear and keep arms, or even to operate a firearms retail store. Indeed, these ordinances were drafted and assume that people have the right to bear arms, and that the ordinance rather state how, where these things will be done in our town. I assure you we are not, those who are speaking out in favor of the ordinance are not afraid of Templar Sports. In fact, the people who are speaking out tonight, I would submit, are some of the bravest people you have in town. It takes a lot of courage to come up here and say the things we're saying and to step out in front and to get out in front of these issues. Are we wary of Templar Sports? Yes. This is the company that gave notice of their business intent, not in the town of Los Gatos Weekly, but in the Santa Clara Weekly, a newspaper not sold in our town, not carried in our library, not delivered in trucks to our town. So we are wary, but we're not afraid. I do applaud the steps taken so far in drafting the ordinances for Los Gatos, albeit I am looking forward, as well as a number of others, to the land use permit portion in the final draft. Several California cities and counties, Lafayette, San Francisco, Campbell, Richmond, Marin, have legally and successfully enacted such ordinances that are necessary to regulate firearms dealers as the citizens in those communities saw fit. And we are, those ordinances require that currently existing firearms dealers comply with the new provisions. So it's been done before successfully. I appreciate the fact that the current ordinances provide for us to comment tonight on include section 14.130.065 regarding compliance. The section is modeled in the spirit of the solid ordinances enacted successfully in other towns and responds to Mayor Spector's request, specifically on February 11th, 2013, for town staff to research the Lafayette ordinance that requires compliance by existing firearm dealers. I ask the council to hear the voice of the citizens of Los Gatos that are being put forward tonight, the voice of its children who we represent, to enact these meaningful ordinances, one that apply to all firearms retailers, not just Templar, future, current dealers in the town of Los Gatos. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Klopotek and then Chris Giangrego. Greco.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Klopotek. I am from the city of Saratoga, and I'm interested in Templar sports. Since I'm not a resident, I still like the idea of having a very nice gun store very close to where I live. Comments I have are on the proposed ordinance, and I believe the proposed ordinance is illegal for the following reasons. And I gleaned these from the excellent letters provided by one Mr. Jess Guy, and also by Claudia Ayala from Michelle and Associates, which are part of today's document package. Among other reasons, Mr. Guy elegantly points out that, as written, the ordinance appears to be arbitrary and capricious and simply not interpretable easily by the average citizen. And if its intent is to strictly regulate Templar sports and sporting goods stores, Mr. Guy has got an excellent example in there about how it could be interpreted to apply to a private citizen trying to give ammunition to somebody in their own family. Further, the ordinance violates federal and state law, which can be viewed as an infringement of Second Amendment rights. Their Second Amendment rights, or when you get into constitutional law at the federal level, I'm sure everybody's aware of the three types of bases: rational basis, heightened scrutiny, and then compelling scrutiny, for which rational basis is things like age or financial status. But heightened scrutiny means that the government has to, the thing about heightened scrutiny and compelling scrutiny is that the government has to show that it either is necessary for an important government purpose or compelling scrutiny for essential for a government purpose. The section of the ordinance dealing with the actual gun registration puts the council into gun control litigation liability because various federal courts, appellate through the Supreme Court, have held violations of the Second Amendment rights are at a minimum heightened scrutiny, which means that the town council in any suit would have to prove at least a necessary interest and maybe a compelling interest as to why they passed the ordinance. And the crux here is that passing an ordinance because a vocal minority do not like guns is neither necessary or a compelling government interest. And as a result, I think that if you pass this ordinance, you're basically opening up the town to excessive litigation, which can also be seen in the Michelle letter. And I'd rather see the town spend the money on your excellent parks and outdoor recreation facilities rather than fighting gun control lawsuits.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Giangreco, then Dominic DiCarlo.
I'm Chris Giangreco. I'm a resident of San Jose. I've been very interested in this topic since I first heard about it. The gentleman sitting over there in the corner who said he was from Los Gatos and concerned about spending his money within town, his comments I felt were very appropriate. Myself, not being a resident of this town, but yet being concerned with what happens in neighboring communities, I think everybody should be concerned with what's happening in their local communities. So I would like to, I've got a question regarding one of the, some of the terminology that was used by the city attorney with regards to the parks. If whoever's in charge of that, if they could scroll that down a couple of pages. Consideration, back it up one, please. Consideration of proximity to schools and parks and selected establishments. And I believe the terminology was also used at the end of that, consideration of sensitive receptors. Was that a term that I heard? At any rate, I thought that was a term that was said, and I have questions regarding what would be considered a sensitive receptor. At any rate, the last time I spoke, I said that I would vote with my wallet, and I've done that. I've spent maybe $5 in this city, with the exception of spending at Templar Sports and spending at the DMV. And should this process continue the way it appears to continue, I will not spend any money in this city. I will do my best to avoid spending any of my cash to support local communities except for Templar Sports. So,
Thank you. Last card I have, Dominic DiCarlo.
Hi, my name's Dominic DiCarlo. I've been a resident of Los Gatos since 1988. All I want to do is ask this council that before you pass this ordinance, that you really think about in your heart why you're even bothering with an ordinance like this. When I read the ordinance, it looks like you're targeting a specific entity, Templar Sports, an entity that's already gone through all of the rules and regulations and legalities of getting the permissions and the, to open up their business. And we already have so many regulations and gun laws in the nation as well as the state. We have the toughest state laws in the country. As a California resident, I cannot buy a gun in any other state without going through a special import procedure and paying additional monies. The other thing I want to say is that we only have one gun shop now. Instead of, if you have to do an ordinance to take care of the paranoid and the uneducated when it comes to guns, if you have to do it, then why don't write something that is going to promote business and not kill business? Get another gun shop in this town and have some competition and help drive down prices and take care of your residents. I bet you if you put this to a vote, there's a much higher percentage of people in Los Gatos that want gun shops and promote the ownership of guns than there are people who are afraid of guns and want guns to go away. You got to remember, guns don't shoot people. People shoot people. Where we should be spending our money is on education, parks, police, protection. I've been robbed. And I had to actually do my own police work and discover who robbed me, and then get Los Gatos Police and Santa Cruz County sheriffs involved. It's the people that you need to take care of. It's the parks you need to take care of. You're wasting a lot of our money on putting in regulations that who's going to enforce when you already have federal funds doing a lot of enforcement for you. But if you have to write an ordinance, then do something that promotes business, not kills business. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, again, if you want to speak, please submit a card. I have 2 more left. Brad Cyphers and then Brett Johnson.
I'm impressed, Ms. Mayor. You actually pronounced my name correctly. You're one of the very few. Thank you. My impression of what is kind of driving all this is you're concerned about safety of kids, and et cetera, et cetera. Your children are far more at risk from your neighbor's pool than they are from your neighbor's gun. Far more children drown in swimming pools than are killed by guns. If you're really concerned about safety, maybe you should, this is being facetious, but permit requirements on pool builders and Leslie's Pool Supply. They're selling pool supplies that are endangering children. The difference between pools and guns is pools are a game, a toy. They don't have any other really socially redeeming value. Guns at least have the redeeming value that they actually save lives. They save far more lives than they take. That's a gun is used to protect people, to allow people to protect themselves and their families. The other thing I want to talk about was the land use. Everybody seems to be concerned about the land use. They're concerned that if you walk by the store, your kid walks by the store, somebody's going to jump out and say, "Hey kid, you want a gun?" It's like, no, this is a law-abiding store. They have a stack of laws they have to abide by, selling to law-abiding citizens that aren't going to be going out and giving these guns to the neighborhood kids. You're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. I guess that's the main focus I want you to be aware of, is that this Templar Sports doesn't cause problems. The illegal guns are illegal, and they're not sold by businesses like Templar. You're trying to regulate something. You're trying to solve a problem, like I said, that Templar isn't involved in. I would encourage you to look other directions for the solution to what you're looking for, not to over-regulate Templar. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, last card, Brett Johnson.
How are you? My name is Brett Johnson. I actually didn't come here to speak, but after watching this and listening to the people that have obviously never tried to buy a firearm, this is pretty ridiculous. My daughter and I are starting a veterans organization to take veterans, disabled veterans, fishing, hunting, camping, whatever they want to do. I stopped by Templar to ask them a couple of months ago if there was any way we could get a discount on fishing gear and hunting gear. And his partner, Rick, told me absolutely not. And he said, "We will donate anything you need to take Bay Area veterans in the outdoors." That's the kind of people you're trying to screw. Those are good people doing good things for your community, for our community. I think it's a shame.
All right, this is my last card. John Shepherdson.
I didn't plan on speaking here tonight on this issue. I just wanted to offer a few comments. From the Constitution, I just looked at it on my cell phone, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So it's not an absolute rule. We can't have bazookas, we can't have tanks, but we can't have absolute regulation against guns. So we look to the Constitution, and it seems to me that we look to the existing case law. And then that gives us the guidance for the degree of lawful regulation. And then I think the town decides for itself what it wants to do. The citizens and the town council decide the scope of regulation within the bounds of the law. Federal and state laws naturally must be considered and followed. And yet, I think that the town of Los Gatos can, if it chooses to, the citizens, the council, can further regulate if it sees fit and it is within the law. I appreciate the comments from those that are outside the town. And whatever your decision, I think naturally the council must give priority to the comments that are made by the citizens of the town. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other cards. Is there anyone else wishing to address this council on this agenda item? All right, if you do, please step forward, come up, give us your name, submit your card after you speak.
Thank you, Barbara. I'll submit the card. I want to congratulate the council on coming forth with these ordinances. You've done a magnificent job of listening to the majority of the people in Los Gatos who really want and feel that there is a need by this community for ordinances that apply to weapons, not taking away people's Second Amendment rights. No way. It's the assault weapons, the weapons that within a few minutes can wipe out kids, teachers, people, anyone. Those are the weapons that we want to make sure don't get sold in this town. And really and truly, when you think about it, it is a magnificent job that you've done to put together these ordinances. The people that I've been working with so diligently to support you in every way, we want you to pass this. It's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have another card. Thang Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I came here to show support for all FFL dealers and law-abiding firearms owners. I've been listening for a while. I did not intend to speak, rather as to observe. See, I come from a town, San Jose, and we see quite a few crimes happening lately because of the insurgence of gang violence and the early release of prisoners. And we've been underfunded. We've lost 400 officers because of pension reform. And pretty much every citizen in San Jose is a defenseless victim because somehow it is morally superior for us to be that way than to defend ourselves. Now, I also want to address a few comments made by some of these people here ahead of me, before me, such as the 80% lower receivers being sold, regarding the Santa Monica shooting. With the advent of 3D printers, it's a moot point at this point. There's documents and blueprints floating around. Anybody can make a gun by themselves. They don't need to be following the laws or adhering to such ordinances. we can make any sort of lower receiver out of anything, be it plastic, aluminum, wood, and they can also make it in prison as well. Now, regarding the Santa Monica shooting, I'd like to ask the people of Los Gatos, did the shooter adhere to the 10 rounds per magazine limit when he was committing such atrocities? Did he read the sign that said no guns permitted? And most of all, did he remind himself and did he remember that murder was already illegal? Now, there was another comment regarding that we should be keeping records for firearms dealers. Well, we already do that. We're required to keep DROS records for several years. And we also submit people who apply for firearms through the NIC background checks, the 4473 form, if I'm correct. And I also want to address that these are not assault weapons. These are semi-automatics. Assault weapons are already banned. And you say that these are weapons of war, then what are knives? Knives are used in wars. Pistols are used in wars. But most of all, our minds are used in wars. So you cannot regulate people's thoughts. You cannot regulate a criminal who is bent on murdering innocent people. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy Wu? And again, to keep the process moving, get your cards in so we can have you speak one after the other.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I've been here before on another matter. I was not also intending to speak on this matter, but since so many speakers have come up, I thought I'd just give you a background story. In the last 3 years, I've attended more military funerals than I would care to remember. The last one was about a year ago in May, for the son of my good friend Pete Mnookin, whose son, Captain Matt Mnookin, was killed in Afghanistan. There is a scar on my heart for every military funeral that I've been to. And I can only say this, having been in the service myself, I am very reluctant to state that the right to bear arms should not apply in every municipality. I don't think the right to own arms by themselves should be restricted. However, that decision has to be made on a case-by-case basis and within each town. If this town so chooses to restrict the sale of firearms within its borders, I believe that this town should be able to do so. I don't believe that simply because Los Gatos refuses to have such businesses in town that it prevents citizens from being able to own weapons that are legally allowed. They can certainly go elsewhere. There are many municipalities that will sell to them. There are many mail-order gun manufacturers who can sell to a facility that can then inspect and turn over those weapons to the individuals wishing to purchase those weapons. I expected actually to see a lot more people here because my understanding is that there was a campaign to offer a discount for members of other towns to come into town and speak against this proposed moratorium. There was, I believe, a discount being offered by Templar Sports. I found that abhorrent. I found that repugnant to hire mercenaries to come and speak on behalf of gun rights. I myself have no problem with gun ownership. However, I do have a problem with outsiders trying to come in to our town and dictate what we must and must not do.
Thank you. I have no further cards. I am seeing no one coming forward. And so I will close at this point the public testimony of this hearing and turn to the council for questions, comments, motions. Ms. Jensen.
I have a question for Ms. Prop based on some of the comments that we heard. I know that I asked this question earlier and posed this question as a member of the committee, but is there a legal reason not to include a reference to an applicable permit should the town decide to enact an applicable land use permit in this ordinance if it's passed.
With respect to the requests to add references to a land use permit as a requirement in a regulatory business permit, when the land use regulations don't exist now, and that's not before this council, and the council can't predict what it may or may not adopt in the future, you may find yourself, if you adopt that now or include that language, amending this ordinance if those regulations don't come into fruition. It would potentially be confusing to an applicant to read an ordinance that has a requirement for a land use ordinance and check the town code and not find any applicable regulations. Currently, the town has a moratorium in effect for any new businesses, and that would govern at this time. But at such time that the council does or doesn't adopt land use regulations in the future, it's the recommendation to include any references in the regulatory permit at that time once council's made a decision. While there's no absolute prohibition, again, it's just a concern about confusion, ambiguity, and poor ordinance drafting.
Mr. Larson, do you have something to add?
Yes, I did want to highlight that on page 4 of 9, under section 14.130.030, investigation for permit, item B, it already states that the Director of Community Development shall determine whether the conduct of the business at the proposed location will be in compliance with zoning requirements and any other applicable rule, regulation, or ordinance of the town. And then as specified in the next section, that results of that investigation are provided to the council for the public hearing. So as those ordinances change over time, the director will retain that same obligation to investigate and report compliance to the council.
Further questions of staff? Seeing none, do we have discussion or a motion? Mr. Brzezinski.
Well, we'll continue discussion. You know, I hear a lot of concern from some people that things are moving so slowly. This is a legal document, and these things are not done in haste. And as a member of the ad hoc committee, I assure you that to develop this so that we could have something for our community to consider before we get to summer was very important to us. And then second of all, we are working simultaneously with the continuation of this development. So if you are concerned or feel that somehow something's going to be lost, I assure you that the ad hoc committee has not in any way, shape, or form eliminated that particular component, but we felt it very important that we get this aspect to the community at this point in time. In terms of the question of who should make the determination, this is a representative government. We are the people who represent you, and so we're the ones who are obligated to make this vote. And I want to let you know that we take this very seriously. And when we're looking at some of the language that seems to be repetitive or redundant, as I heard some people describe tonight, it's probably so that we can remind ourselves of what those laws are under which we exist. Because many of those laws are unknown to so many people, and this allows us, if there's a redundancy, the redundancy is for purpose of clarification and education. And in that context, this is how this particular language was developed. As the manager has indicated, we have a time frame. The time frame is not without some kind of constraint. We're looking at August, September to be back and be complete, so long as we can do our due diligence and make sure that we do all those things that are in conformance to the law, because we have no intention to put this community under some form of litigation in court that will impact us in a negative fashion. And so that is probably through a good degree of caution that we are approaching in this particular situation. And we are continually evaluating what current legal status is regarding every one of the things that we're considering. So it's complicated, but that's basically the direction of travel we have at this point.
Further discussion or motion? Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. In reference to the 60 days of security video versus 1 year, which is used in other jurisdictions, myself not being part of the ad hoc committee, I'm just curious. I realize that when crimes are committed, sometimes the wheels of justice move very slowly, and 60 days seems kind of short to me. On the other hand, I think, is it burdensome or is it too expensive to maintain these videos for 1 year? So I'd like a little more input on that concept from staff.
Police Department representative joined the ad hoc subcommittee, and when we viewed another jurisdiction's time limit for security tape retention, I think it actually came in at 30, and we extended it to 60. 1 year, I think, is in Campbell's. I don't know if that's a benchmark across the state. Certainly 90 days, but it just becomes choosing a number and going with it. And if we find it's too long or too short, then it will be changed in a future review. But Police Department recommended 60 certainly as a minimum.
Thank you for that.
Okay, we have Mr. Brzezinski? Oh, no, you were just nodding your head. All
I
right.
was going to confirm what the manager said, because we were looking at 30 days, and on police advisement, we extended it to 60.
Mr. Larson.
Yes. There was one other comment made by several speakers that I wanted to clarify. In the staff report dated January 31st that went to your February hearings, we did outline the two regulatory schemes that about 30 jurisdictions across the state have used. One is a land use one that by state law has to go to the Planning Commission. The other is this regulatory permit. At that time, we called it a police permit that is coming to you before you tonight. The point I wanted to clarify and correct some of the public comment is in that staff report, we explicitly stated that the regulatory permit could be applied and had been in other jurisdictions to existing retailers. And that was part of the public record back in February.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to follow up on what Mr. Brzezinski said. As the person who sits in the center here and sets or helps set the agenda, and I know there were some of you who were concerned about the speed or lack of speed with which this issue was coming forward. I can tell you that this is probably the most challenging year that this town has ever had, and that I am one of the people, along with the council here and the ad hoc committee, who are moving this issue forward as quickly as we can. We have a lot of things on our plate, but I ask that this go forward, and it has been coming forward. So I'm actually pleased at what I consider the speed. Those of you out there may not agree with me, but I commend this group for what they've been doing and the expediency with which they have been moving. All right. Discussion, motion? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I also want to commend all the people for coming forward and speaking tonight, as well as the ad hoc committee for their work on this. And I'm willing to make a motion and move that we waive the reading of the ordinance and introduce the ordinance recommended by the council ad hoc committee to require the permit process for the sale of firearms and ammunitions.
Do I have a second? I have a motion. Ms. Jensen?
I'll second the motion.
I would ask, so we have a motion and a second. I would ask the maker of the motion, would he consider including in his motion an addition, which would probably be on page 3.9, but not necessarily, that would have the, not only the identity of the partnership or corporation, but the principals of the partners of the partnership and the shareholders of the corporation to be identified.
Yes, I will amend the motion.
Ms. Jensen?
That's fine.
All right, further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. This council has July off, and this meeting is adjourned.
Excuse me, we need to read the title, the ordinance.
You waived the reading.
Yeah, but we have to read the title.
We still have to read the title, I'm sorry.
All right. You got it right, and he didn't.
Okay, ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos to add a new section 8 to Chapter 14 of the Town of Los Gatos Code entitled Firearms, Dealers, Sale of Firearms and Ammunition, to require a regulatory permit process for the sale of firearms and ammunition.
Ms. Rose,
you.
thank you for being on your toes. And now, this meeting is adjourned.